He rolled his eyes. All right, Maya. Robert turned her one last time back towards the table, but this time to face John Arryn. Maya without pause immediately let out a loud screech. The sudden and piercing wail made Lyanna wince. She was not the only one. I wasn't aware Lord Arryn's house was a dying rabbit, Jaime observed dryly. It was a falcon. Robert looked to be the only one unbothered by the sound. I taught her that first. Jaime did not look impressed. Figures, he replied without bite. I much prefer the wolf, Ashura noted with a teasing glint in her violet eyes. I think the lion was the best. Elia had taken Maya from a willing Robert and put her on her own lap. The girl did not seem to mind. She accepted Elia's hold with a smile. Her attention then her hands quickly moved to Elia's necklace, fascinated by the jewels that adorned it. My wife is wise, Jaime complimented, and completely impartial. Clearly, Ned said from where he was sitting. His lips crooked in a smile. At times like this, Lyanna felt more intruder than guest. There was a camaraderie between those in the room that she was not a part of. This show of friendship was so clear that even a blind man could notice it. They were so quick to fall into an easy rhythm with one another in their conversations and interactions. Lady Ashura has the right of it, Lyanna agreed, not allowing herself to be unintentionally excluded by her brother and friends. She knew it was not on purpose. They were not like that. They've been nothing but welcoming to me since I first met them. She figured they were probably unaware of how it could come across as intimidating. To be unsure if others could partake in a conversation between such intimate friends or if they should just stay silent out of fear of interrupting or ruining it. Ashura nodded in her direction. It is good to see I'll have such a bright sister to call my own. Lyanna smiled. It will be good to have a sister. Ashura returned her smile. A brief look of relief flickered in her gaze. Elia made a soft noise from the back of her throat to remind them of her presence. Maya tried to mimic the noise, but it sounded more like a gag that had Elia and others laughing. Sisters, Lyanna amended. Her own smile grew. She did not find herself brave or willing enough to try to argue against what Lady Elia was implying. The Godswood of Storm's End was deserted when she arrived. It was small and covered with green. There were a few slender trees that broke through the stony soil, looking like fingers clawing upwards to reach the sky. At the center of the Godswood was a large pale weirwood tree that stood out amidst all the green and brown of the rest of the area. Its face was solemn and its red eyes met hers. Storm's End was an impressive fortress. She remembered some of the stories and histories written about it, since some believed it was a Stark that helped to build it. Not just any Stark, but the famous Stark who'd earned the name, Bran the Builder. And now a Stark will wed here. They were just waiting for the arrival of the prince and his retinue. Brandon had sent an earlier message saying that he would not be able to attend. He sent his apologies and promised to try to visit Ned's new seat before the year was done. Lyanna suspected father was upset, since this had been a chance for Brandon to interact with his future bride, the Lady Catelyn Tully. The sound of movement caused her to look over her shoulder to see who was approaching. Lyanna. It was Robert. He stood at a respectable distance when he announced himself. She dipped her head in greeting, but did not speak. Robert's steps were heavy as he went. How has your stay been? I have no complaints. Good. Robert walked past her. I'd be a poor host otherwise. I am curious on a matter, she asked, reflecting on what she had seen between the older Baratheon brothers since their arrival. Did we come at a poor time? Robert frowned. What gives you that impression? Perhaps, it is not my place to say. And would that truly stop you from speaking? Lyanna's lips twitched. It would not. You are Ned's sister. I will hear your words. It appears we've come during a feud between yourself and your brother, Stannis. Robert chuckled, but there was no warmth or mirth that she'd come to expect. This was neither infectious nor charming, but stiff. What you see is us, he shrugged. I am not close to Stannis or Renly. Why? She didn't understand. Lyanna could never imagine, nor would she want to imagine, such a relationship to root itself between her and any of her brothers. How could Robert shun his own blood? Stannis and I are too different. Would you think my brothers and I are all the same? Robert turned away from her. No, I would not. He finally admitted after a long heartbeat of silence. She stayed quiet, unsure if it was wise to continue to press him on this issue where she had no authority or even reason for addressing it. It's easier. What? She was caught off guard by his unexpected answer. It's easier, he repeated, to just accept that this is how it will be between us, that it will not change, so why should we try? Because, he's your brother, she answered at once. Lyanna found herself disappointed in the man in front of her. It was lazy and cowardly of him to accept such a thing and give no effort to make any changes. He'd rather do nothing than even try. She found it pathetic. He lowered his head, looking more a chastised child than the Lord of Storm's End. Brandon, Benjen, Ned, she listed her brothers who she loved so fiercely. They are all so different, and they can make me mad, make me want to shout and curse at them at times. Memories of Brandon's little games that he played on her came to her. She thought more fondly of them now than she did when her brother inflicted them upon her. However, they are always there for me. They will make me laugh. They care for me, support me. How often had Benjen snuck out sparring swords so that they could practice together in the Godswood? Or Brandon taking her riding when she should have been inside? Or Ned looking the other way for her when he should have been looking for her? I could not think of a life where I treated any of them as stiffly as you do, Stannis. She shook her head. You are cordial to your servants and bannermen but distant to your own brothers. He stiffened. His expression was difficult to describe. It was not anger that clouded his features, but something else. You think less of me. Just like with his look, she could not properly put her finger on his tone. I do. Lyanna would not start lying to him now. She met his blue eyes that she was so used to be shining in good cheer, but now they were dim in their gaze. There was something there, she observed. It was brief in its presence, but she saw it on his face. He was hurt. Despite her annoyance and disappointment in him, it did not mean she wanted that. I did not think myself capable of such an influence on him. She had only interacted with him a handful of times and most of it has been spread out over the years. Why does he care? She did not want to dwell on that question or what it could lead to, so she pressed on. Do you not have any good memories with your brothers? I went to the Vale at 8. Ned became my brother. He declared the latter part fervently. I did not see Stannis and Renly much, and when I visited he moved around the weirwood tree, almost as if hiding from her inquisitive view. I was more eager and interested in returning to my friends, Ned, and then later Jaime and my cousin. Then I was in seeing my brothers. He moved back around, but his eyes were looking around the Godswood as if trying to search for memories with his brothers, Renly and Stannis. There is a memory Stannis and I share. Robert looked upwards towards the looming tower of Storm's End. We stood together on one of the parapets. We were waiting for the arrival from our parents who were returning from Essos. He pointed with his hand to the spot where he and Stannis had supposedly stood. We were all excited to see what gifts they had brought home and the stories they'd tell us, which they had teased in their letters. A ghost of a smile appeared and then disappeared on his lips. But that was not to be, he said quietly. The wind proud shattered against the rocks before the bay swallowed it up. His voice was flat, detached from the horror he was reliving. We watched their ship sink together. We were quiet and powerless. We just watched. His jaw clenched. It was Stannis who squeezed my hand in comfort. I was the older brother, but Stannis was the stronger one. Is the stronger one. Lyanna felt a pang of anguish in her chest upon hearing Robert's story and watching him tell it. She could not imagine witnessing her parents' death. It was a disquieting confession from him and it gave her pause and silence. No words were quick to come to her in an attempt to try to comfort the Lord of Storm's End. No, not some lord. She didn't like the distance that title suddenly put between them. It was Robert. My brother's friend. Robert cleared his throat. Forgive me, he apologized, that was improper of me. He misread her silence as a condemnation of him revealing such intimate things to her. He struggled with trying to save himself, to shield his behavior from her, which he clearly believed he had tarnished by not just speaking of such things, but how he spoke of them. He's afraid I'll think less of him for it. She was about to scold him for thinking that or the need to apologize, but her brother's voice interrupted them. Taking away not just that chance, but any chance she had of trying to comfort Robert. That realization brought an odd, but fleeting feeling in her chest that she couldn't quite define. Robert, "We've received a raven." Ned moved to meet them. "It's from Lord Buckler." The Lord of Storm's End recovered quickly at the intrusion of her brother. He forced himself to smile upon seeing him, but it did not linger when Ned's message sunk in. Robert groaned. "Give it to Cresson." He waved a hand as if to shoo it away. Lyanna was put off by his casual disregard about receiving a letter from one of his bannermen. She could never imagine her father responding to the news of a raven in such a way. It was marked urgent. Ned did not seem surprised by his friend's reaction. "Lord Buckler reports it's about Prince Daeron. Their retinue was attacked on the road." "What?" Robert's voice rivaled a thunderclap. Ned didn't flinch. "Prince Daeron and most of their guests are safe, but there were casualties. We need to leave." Robert rallied swiftly. He may have been put off and dismissive about responding to Odeus Bannerman, but when it came to something of interest to him such as the well-being of his cousin, he acted at once to address the problem. "Jaime and Sir Harbert are seeing to the horses," Ned informed them. "We're all bringing some of our men to help with their return and safe escort to Storm's End." Good. Some of Robert's anger was calmed by that report. "This is a fucking outrage." He shook a clenched fist. "To attack my cousin. I will not have it." He growled, "It's those Brotherhood." Robert spat the name out. "Brotherhood?" Lyanna repeated. They both turned towards her, looking mildly surprised by her appearance as if just remembering she was with them. She smothered her annoyance at how quickly she had been forgotten and ignored, because she was more curious with what they were talking about. "Yes, the Kingswood Brotherhood," Robert clarified. "They're scum and bandits that should have been pulled out like the weeds they are. They would be bold to strike out against a retinue that includes a prince," Ned observed. Robert was not deterred. "It's them. They've grown arrogant since little has been done about them this past year. I can only do so much since much of the Kingswood is in the Crown lands." "No one is blaming you," Ned said softly, as if sensing the underlying reason for his friend's distress. "My cousin was attacked, Ned. Robert's face was going red, and it was on my land. I'll tear down every tree in the Kingswood if it means ridding ourselves of this brotherhood of rogues and cutthroats. Let us first get to Bronze Egget to meet up with the prince and what's left of his retinue," Ned cautioned, "before we make any hasty decisions." Robert let loose an angry breath before giving a stiff nod. His face returned its normal shade and soon he was smiling. "Always thinking, Ned." He slapped his friend on the back. "One of us has to, Robert." A small smile came to her brother's face. "It's kept you alive this long," Robert roared, but this time it was a laugh and not some angry curse. "Let us be off quickly." Agreed. Ned was solemn. He then turned to her to speak, but she beat him to it. "I know." She waved her hand before he could deliver his spiel about not just what was expected of her while he was away, but that he was leaving, and she couldn't come with him. It was all very tiring in its predictability. She'd rather not hear it for the umpteenth time. It made her want to roll her eyes. "I haven't forgotten what is expected of me." Lyanna especially knew not to voice that she was a better and faster rider than most and could be of assistance to them, because she knew what that disappointing answer would be. "Thank you," he nodded. "We should be back within a few days. I'll spend all my time pacing and fretting until you return, brother." She said it with an innocent air about her which was immediately belied by the smirk she said it with. Ned chuckled. "I'd expect nothing less." Robert had watched their exchange in silence. He dipped his head to her. "Lyanna." "Robert," she returned, but it suddenly felt like such an inadequate response after everything she saw and discussed with him. And yet that was all that could be said as they left the Godswood while she chose to linger. She felt the silent gaze of the weirwood tree and met its red eyes. She dipped her head in deference to the old gods. She welcomed the peaceful calm that came over her which helped to settle her restless thoughts and confusing emotions that were beginning to tangle up with each other. Lyanna dare not voice them aloud. "They hear me," she knew with certainty upon hearing the pale branches above her swaying in the breeze. "So hopefully they'll answer me." Notes. I mentioned it the first time they were introduced, but I'll say it again, Denise and Elbereth have switched in this story. Denise is the heir and Elbereth is the spare. I don't want to get into spoilers, but I do want to caution people's expectations. If there is to be war and battles, it won't be covered in great detail. In short, some things will be shown. I'm sorry if that disappoints you, that is why I wanted to warn you now. Chapter 25, Relief. Notes. Thank you for the thoughtful and detailed comments. It really means a lot to me. I'm sorry I haven't had time to reply to them, but just know that reading them always brightens my day. Thank you. Chapter text. 281 AC. Daeron. The skirmish was over. Men were killed on both sides, and he had killed his first man. A feat that evoked little within him. I felt nothing. When Dark Sister ended that bandit's life. Why would you? That sounded like father. A dragon is responsible to no man. Remember that, my son. In that moment, it wasn't reflections of kills made that had spurred him through the field of carnage where horses and men were strewn about, dead and dying. All that drove him was his betrothed, Cersei. With each speedy step he moved towards her. Cersei. Daeron had put Sir Arthur in charge of cleanup and recovery now that Lord Buckler's forces had joined theirs and secured the area. He knew there were other matters to tend to and oversee, such as the wounded and the dead, but it was Cersei he needed to see. It didn't matter that he already knew they were safe. It had been reported that the Lady Lysa had fainted, and Sir Gawain had been injured, and those were things he needed to address, but they had to wait. It all had to wait. Daeron needed to see her with his own eyes. And then there she was before him. Glorious. He could not help but admire her. Once the uncertainty faded and relief filled him upon knowing she was truly well. Her eyes burned like wildfire. Her golden hair fell about her, messy and loose, and not even the specks of enemy's blood upon her dress could deter his appreciation of the beauty in front of him. That was when they embraced. She did not shake in his arms. She was still and certain. She did not weep into his shoulder. She did not lament. There was no doubt in her. She was steel in silk. He kissed her hair and held her. Thankful to have her with him. She moved in his arms, but only to bury herself closer to him. He did not protest. The scent of blood, sweat, and wild flowers clung to her like some strange perfume. "You saved me," she said softly. "What?" He was confused by such an odd declaration. He had done nothing of the sort, and it was not something he'd forget. "I was not there." Cersei looked up at him. Her eyes glimmered like emeralds in the sunlight. "The sword, the training," she clarified, "if it wasn't for such things." He gave a slight nod and was thankful she did not continue. He did not want to think of such things. "You would have still prevailed, my lady." It was her who was now confused, so he added, "You are too fierce to do anything other than triumph." A slow smile came to her lips. She put a hand to his cheek. "Are you well?" "I am now." She kissed him, a tantalizing kiss that had him holding her tightly to him. He could feel the slow stirring in his chest. A soft moan escaped her lips and heat burned through him. Daeron felt more primal than Prince in those scant heartbeats. "Prince Daeron." Sir Arthur's voice was an unwanted jolt that broke them apart. A flash of annoyance flickered across her pretty face. Her mouth pressed into a thin line. "Yes." He kept his tone in check for the interruption, because he knew the knight was doing his duty, and Daeron too had duties that he needed to see. "We've put the wounded on wagons," he reported, nearing them. "Lord Buckler will send more for the corpses." "Very good," Daeron nodded. "How many did we lose?" "More than a dozen, my prince." Sir Arthur frowned. "They were well coordinated. Further proof they were waiting for us was with those fallen logs." Daeron remembered the trick. Their caravan had been stretched. That was further exploited with the fallen timbers onto the road to further divide and separate the two sides. That had been when they struck from the woods. "They were mostly guards," the knight continued. "The only noble we lost was this ward for Lord Tully." Arthur looked to be trying to remember the name. "Petter Baelish," he shrugged, unsure if he got it right. "We shall take his corpse with the wounded." Daeron wasn't aware of a House Baelish or even where their holdings were. If he was a ward to Lord Tully, he suspected maybe somewhere in the Riverlands. Is the Brotherhood?" "It is," Arthur confirmed grimly. "We have 2 survivors." He felt his betrothed's fingers interlaced with his. "Inform Lord Buckler that I will have need of his gallows." My prince, surprise spread across the knight's face. They've surrendered to me, I accepted in the promise of mercy and the black. He and Cersei had already begun walking back to join the rest what remained of their party as well as Lord Buckler's. They attacked a royal party, Sir Arthur. He turned back. There will be no mercy. There will only be justice. Daeron, you must reconsider. Enough, Daeron cut in sharply. Have a care, Sir Arthur. He raised a finger in warning. Your words may be well-intentioned, but you are speaking to a prince. Unhappy at the knight's tone and manner of address. You gave promises you could not keep. That was your error, not mine, he observed coolly. If you will not follow my orders, then ride back to King's Landing and send me a knight who will. How is he? Sir Gawain will recover. Prince Daeron found his betrothed in the Bronze Eggets Hall. He took the empty seat beside her. He had just returned from visiting his sworn shield in one of the guest chambers that Lord Buckler had provided for them. The Lord of the Bronze Egget proved to be a gracious host to the prince's surviving retinue, surrendering all the available rooms he could give them as well as food and ale for the weary and hungry. Lord Buckler had also sent a raven to Robert to inform him of what transpired. Storm's End had wrote promptly back that more men and supplies will be arriving in the company of Robert and the rest of his party. I am glad. A servant was quick to present him a plate and a filled glass. He nodded his thanks. Gawain had been smiling and joking, though laughter did seem to make him wince. The Maester for Bronze Egget said the knight would need more rest in order to recover and suspected it would be months for him to be ready to return for duty. A diagnosis that Gawain tried to dismiss at once, until he grimaced from the sudden movement he made. He then quietly and discreetly lay back down. You've given him quite the story. Cersei looked up from her plate where her food looked mostly untouched. He is not upset. Upset? Daeron shook his head. He'll be pleased to tell it. You know him. How he loves his stories. He'll endure it and embellish it. He chuckled, and was pleased at the small smile that came to her. He'll add that you were fighting a dozen men while he fought wounded with 4 arrows in him. Cersei laughed at that. Is that right? She asked, amused, before she drank from her glass. I'm sure his exaggerations will be even grander. He had finished the warm bread and moved to wash it down with the strong ale that the Stormlands liked to boast of. Besides, Daeron put down his tankard to give his betrothed his full attention. There is nothing wrong with you saving him, wondering if he properly guessed her odd mood. Aegon the Conqueror himself was saved by his wife. Visenya, she muttered. Yes, he agreed, and you are my Visenya. He knew Visenya's sins and her chilly relationship with her husband, Aegon, but to Daeron he hoped his betrothed understood what he truly meant with his declaration. Mayhaps, Iverd, he realized to his growing trepidation in seeing his words seemed to only further cause her inattentiveness and distance. It had been briefly lifted with his earlier japes, but it returned swiftly enough. Is she upset about that bandit she killed? He did not think that was it. Suddenly one of Lord Buckler's men-at-arms came running in. My prince, he greeted him with a hasty bow, Lord Robert arrives. A loud cheer went up from the men, and we've spotted the banners for Stark, Lannister, and Arryn too. Very well. He stood up, turning to her to see the news of Lannister banners caused her to look up, and a smile was on her lips, but there was little of it in her eyes. Shall we go meet them? He offered her his arm, which she duly took for her answer. I would like that, she replied with a warm smile that helped to alleviate his concern. And with that, he and his betrothed left the hall to greet their friend's newly arrived party. Burn them. His father's cackle pricked inside him like hot needles. Burn them. The bandits who had thrown down their swords in surrender were now being marched to be executed. Lord Buckler having prepared the gallows for the criminals. Lord Buckler deferred the task of the punishment to him as he was a prince. The entire castle had gathered, servants and guards as had those brought by his cousin, and his friends, Jaime and Ned. In the backdrop on the walls the banners for Targaryen, Baratheon, Stark, Lannister, Tully, Arryn, and Buckler swayed gently in the breeze. He would not forget how when his friends had heard of his distress and they had come urgently to his side. Or in seeing not just their relief that he was well but the anger on an attack against his person. Robert's rage was loud and booming, Ned's was simmering but silent, and Jaime's was hidden behind a smirk, but it was just as potent. His words and frustration were sharp and cutting. They were all standing behind him. Sir Bryndon and his squire Denys were there. The former remained troubled and upset with himself for having failed to have protected the Tully ward. He had lost sight of him in the heat of battle. Ladies Caitlin and Lysa Tully stood with their uncle, quiet and poised. The two sisters were mourning the loss of their friend, the Tully ward. The Lady Lysa had recovered from her distress that had caused her to faint. She had since thanked his betrothed several times, and seemed to look at her differently in the aftermath of the attack. Circea was standing beside him. Her eyes were hard when they looked at the criminals. The men who dared to attack them. Feed them to the flames. The voice returned. Let them feel the dragon's wrath, let them burn in it. A small part of himself began to waver. Why shouldn't they suffer? Vengeance stirred within him like a waking dragon. They attacked me. They tried to kill me. His mind then cruelly hinted what would have befallen his betrothed had their raid been successful. The dragon roared to show its displeasure, it was a burning intensity. The order was on his lips to rescind his decision. He'd send them to his father. That would please him. A show of my fealty to him as well as allowing a fitting punishment to these rogues, who dared attack their party. Images flickered across his vision of the men burning in the great hall and he could not deny the deviant satisfaction he felt upon watching it. What of your mother? A new voice made itself heard through the thick haze of his growing wrath. He knew what happened to mother when father burned men alive. He visited. It was a sobering chill that cut even deeper. It began to lift that manic grip that had latched onto his heart, poisoning his blood with such a demented taste of vengeance. So what? His father's cruel voice returned. They would have raped your betrothed. They would have killed her. That was the kindling to the dying fire inside him which suddenly sparked and crackled, growing hotter and brighter. Circea, your pretty betrothed, naked, bruised, and blooded, the voice hissed, with a red slash across her pale throat. You're a dragon, so let them burn. For one long second, his heart was armored by indifference. He was ready to change his mind. In that heartbeat, he put aside any thought or concern for anything or anyone else so that he could have his reckoning. Let them burn. It was her that pulled him away from those poisonous chains. Circea had touched his hand, bringing him out of his thoughts and onto the foreground where the headsman was waiting for his orders. There was a solemn silence in the air as the crowd watched and waited for him to give his verdict. Hang them. He watched the men die in stony silence. The bodies twitched and turned on the ropes. Daeron felt sick. It was not for ordering or overseeing their deaths. No, it was that lapse, no matter how brief, that had so thoroughly consumed him. Who am I? Jaime. The wedding between Ned and Ashura had moved forward without delay once the prince's retinue had arrived to Storm's End. Northern weddings were often held at night, which allowed several hours to prepare and make ready for it, and the prince would not hear of further impediments to their union. Robert had unsurprisingly readily agreed with his cousin at the chance for a feast and celebration. Jaime quietly noted Ned's protest seemed more show than sincere. He knew Ned was quite eager to marry his betrothed. The Lady Dane did not even bother to hide behind bland words that were expected of ladies of high birth in regards to their life and virtue. She openly voiced her agreement with the prince and Robert, and that was that. What followed was to Jaime the fastest wedding he had ever been a part of. It had been dark and eerily peaceful. Jaime had just settled himself for the ceremony, resigned to what followed. He suspected it was on the old gods and their ways and why they should be followed or obeyed, then chanting and prayers and songs to praise them, but to his surprise none of that had happened. It was suddenly over before he could realize it. 1 minute, Lady Ashura was being escorted by her brother to the weirwood tree where Ned stood waiting, quiet and smiling. A short exchange followed and then Ned was carrying his new wife into the hall for a feast. The solemn wolf was anything but with his wife in his arms. Jaime was left to follow the guests in disbelief at the quickness of it all. Why didn't we have our wedding in the Godswood? We don't follow the old gods, Derelia reminded him, her voice barely carrying over the noise. The round hall was raucous and loud for the wedding feast. Robert had provided the food, drink, and entertainment for his friend's wedding. He saw it as his duty as his liege lord, though Jaime doubted Robert was this generous or even generally aware of his other bannermen. Jaime saw that as a minor snag. Had I known how swiftly they conducted weddings, I may have reconsidered. He scratched at his chin, pleased at the sound of his wife's laughter. In fact, I think I may have converted. That's blasphemy, Jamie, she patiently pointed out with a light tone rich in mirth. Jamie dismissed it with a wave of his hand. You didn't have to endure all that singing and praying. He rolled his eyes at all the theatrics and gimmicks that were coated in their ceremony. Are you saying that the wait wasn't worth it? Never, he spluttered, realizing that he was dangerously close to saying or implying a very wrong and bad thing he'd never say. His concern for such an offense was short-lived as his inward panic stilled upon hearing Elia's lovely laughter. I am glad. She squeezed his hand. Her eyes shimmered in the candlelight. He leaned forward to meet her lips. She welcomed it with a hum, but before he could begin to truly savor her lips against his, they were interrupted. The lion pounces. Robert's booming voice brought up a great cheer from the other onlookers. Jamie made sure to send a pointed look and a gesture towards his friend. The latter earned him a mild rebuke from his wife and roaring laughter from Robert and others. He looked towards the bride and groom, noticing how lively the two were together sitting alone at the high table. He fondly recalled their wedding, which had happened only last year, but felt so long ago, which prompted him to joke. We're now the old married couple. Robert had put himself as close to Ned as he could and had Ned's sister on his other side. Then it was Ned's brother Benjamin with Lord Arryn and his heir, Denise, with the Tullys beside him. They had found themselves on Asher's side due to the sisterly bond between his wife and the bride. Prince Daeron had given leave for Sir Arthur to have the night off. The knight was not receptive to what he saw as a dereliction of duty. So the two compromised. Arthur had given himself an hour to eat, drink, and celebrate with his sister before insisting he returned to his duty. Jamie understood and respected the knight's insistence. Sir Gawain was injured and went back to King's Landing. The sword of the morning proved true to form and tale. His wife sat behind the contemplative knight, who seemed determined to make sure everyone saw his struggle at having to stray from his duty. Jamie sat to her other side. His sister was on his other side, and then his friend and prince sat beside her. Robert had put his brothers at their table and they sat on the prince's other side, as well as their niece, the bastard-born, Maya Storm. It was not seemly to seat a bastard so high, but Robert didn't really care and would hear no argument. There was only a few Storm Lords in attendance. It seemed Robert didn't give it much thought to invite all of them. Lord Buckler was here, but Jamie suspected he was only here because Robert had just visited his castle, and a few of the other closer seats to Storm's End had also joined and were spread out at the tables in front of them. Old. Elia picked that word from Jamie's earlier remark. He was quick to clarify. Well, I meant me. I'm older than you. Jamie realized he should just quit before the hole gets any deeper. He then looked towards her in hopes of seeing her smiling, but he saw something else. Are you well? He moved closer to her. I think it is the wine. You're not drinking it. Jamie saw her glass was still full and he had never seen any of the passing servants refill hers. Which is strange, since you always drink when I talk. He japed, and was pleased at the small smile that came to her face. That is true, she replied with equal charm. He moved to take her hands, tanned and warm. What's wrong? My stomach, she confessed. I do not want it to distract you. I want to be distracted when my wife is unwell. She kissed his cheek. Then I shall see if Maester Cresson can give me a few minutes. She rose from her seat. Jamie moved to join her, but she put her hand on his shoulder. You will stay and drink. I should go with you. He didn't like the idea of celebrating while his wife was being seen by a maester. You will stay, she repeated, and if I am truly unwell then I'll have a servant come to fetch you. She suggested as a compromise. Jamie nodded. He didn't like it, but he knew she would insist on him staying, and if he didn't relent she may not see the maester at all. Thank you, she showed her appreciation with a brief kiss that only made Jamie want to follow her more. He watched her seek out the maester, who was gracious and looked unbothered at having to leave the feast to see her. What is wrong with Elia? His sister's voice pulled him back to the table where she had taken Elia's empty seat, and he noticed that his friend, Daeron, had taken hers. She thinks it a bad reaction to the wine. Her face was marred with genuine concern for her good sister. They had come a long way, and that observation returned some of Jamie's good cheer. She ordered me to stay and drink. What a cruel wife, Daeron replied dryly. Jaime snorted, we all suffer, my prince. He drank to that and to his friends' laughter that followed. He had been so worried for them when the news had come to Storm's End that their caravan was attacked. When he learned they were well, then that relief crumbled into anger and at such a bold offense towards his family. He could only imagine his father's wrath when the news came to him in the capital. An attack on a Lannister would not be treated lightly. It was later when he arrived at Bronze Egg, it was when he learned of how she handled herself in the skirmish and had actually killed a man. She had wet her sword before him. It seemed such a strange and ludicrous truth he nearly laughed, thinking this some clever jape thought between the prince and his sister. When it was repeated as an actual truth and not a prank, Jaime's mirth had slipped away. He was surely proud of her for taking such an action. Jaime knew of the prince allowing her to spar and encouraging it, something father had not been keen on, but mother had a way of convincing him to let it lie, so he did not intervene. Still, for her to kill someone and to do so before me. How often did a sister beat a brother in such a thing? It was a strange and hollow feeling, but he did not wish to express it aloud and tried his best to keep it hidden. A good jape can be just as good as a shield to hide behind. So sister, will you be knighted before me? Jaime grinned. There was something else. He did not like it, but he could not deny its existence. This seedling of something ugly that moved within at the news of his sister's triumph and how she had bested him at something he never expected. He'd quashed it whenever it stirred its sour discontent. I think not, she replied with a small, but faint smile. I wouldn't wish to steal all your glory. There is a matter I wish to discuss with you, Jaime. The prince spoke softly, but it was his tone that captured Jaime's attention before he could reply to his sister. He felt the warm mirth begin to deflate. Of course, he assured his friend. I've received a raven, Daeron revealed, Sir Barristan is coming to Storm's End to replace Sir Gawain, and with men and orders. He straightened up in his seat. My father, the king, has ordered me to find and destroy this brotherhood. I would ask if you would like to join me. I will. Jaime readily accepted. I would be honored. Daeron looked relieved. Good, I'm glad to have you at my side. I hope to speak to the others. Do you even need to ask Robert? Jaime joked. That got some of the solemnness that was set on the prince's face to thaw. No, I suppose not. Do you not think it wiser, Jaime, to ask or at least tell your wife of this adventure you are set to go on? Cersei's reminder was a bucket of cold water on his unbound excitement. I will tell her. Jaime did not think she would have a problem with it. Yes, they were going after armed men, but they were certainly going to be better prepared as well as informed this time around after that attack on the caravan. Tell who? Elia had returned, looking radiant. What did Cresson say? Jaime got out of his chair to greet her, relieved to see she looked renewed. It was nothing. She sat down beside him. His sister vacating her seat and moved to the empty one. Cresson supplied me with a tonic. Good. Now what and who was it you were going to tell? That's a little confusing, Jaime pointed out. Elia did not find that as amusing as he hoped. It was you. He decided it was better to be quick and blunt than draw it out any further, and the prince has been assigned to take down the Brotherhood and has asked for me to join him. And you accepted? It wasn't a question. Perhaps. Very well, she acquiesced, as long as you don't do anything foolish. That was when Prince Daeron leaned into the conversation. Then I guess you can't go. Uncle Jaime. He looked down into the very blue eyes of Maya Storm. Robert's daughter had somehow found her way to him. He'd blame the revelry for that, as the feast and celebration of the wedding was still in full effect. Up, Uncle Jaime. She pulled on his sleeve. As any good uncle would, he complied. Jaime lifted her up and into his lap, where she was quite delighted to squirm around this way and that, watching and mimicking the dancing guests in front of them. His wife was beside him. They had returned to their seats after a few dances themselves before Elia asked for a reprieve, which he gladly gave. Papa. Maya was pointing across the room to where Robert was. That's right, Elia said sweetly, making the girl preen with pride. Robert was talking to Ned and Ashura. He then moved away to where most of the guests had gathered to drink and dance. He let out a very loud whistle that cut through all the din of the hall and brought every eye in the room on him. Robert greeted their gazes with a large grin. Who thinks they can beat me? He raised his hands as if to flame the fervent voices that rose to meet his challenge. Drinking or fighting, he held up one of his arms and flexed a rather impressively large muscle that caused more than a few of the women to blush and smile in their admiration. The dancing was forgotten, as was much of the conversing. They began to move their way to where the Lord of Storm's End was waiting. He was sitting and waiting and drinking. "There be a fine reward for the one who is able to beat me." That had brought the rest over, forming a large crowd which circled around Robert, buzzing in anticipation to the first challenger. Nobles, knights, and the servants were all drawn in by Robert's boasting and easy charm. It was only from his seat at the table did Jaime notice Ned and Ashura slip away. The guests all had their backs turned, focused on Robert, and were unable to see the couple exit. I wonder how they'll react when they finally notice. Elia had noticed too. Her mood had steadily improved throughout the night. Whatever tonic Crescent had given her had been very effective. He'd have to thank him the next time he saw him. He loved to see his wife in such high spirits. He didn't do that for our wedding. Jaime felt a little offended. It was mostly for show, but still, the bedding was not a pleasing experience in his opinion. "I just don't think it's fair." Jaime turned away after Robert had soundly beaten his first opponent, a knight in Robert's service. "I mean, if I had to be stripped down and pinched by a bunch of women, then Ned should too." Jaime gave a dramatic shudder. "It's been very hard to hold a conversation with Lady Crickehall now that she's glimpsed certain parts of me. Or Lady Swift, who helped to rip my trousers off." Elia snorted, but did not sound the least bit sympathetic. "Our bannerman, and the guards and servants seeing me nearly naked." Jaime added the last word in a whisper. Maya was still on his lap, but her attention was on her father, who was continuing to defeat challenger after another. "How are they supposed to take me seriously?" He didn't get an answer, because that was when Maya turned around to face him. Her smile was bright and infectious, just like her father's. She was fascinated by the golden lion brooch he wore on his doublet, and began roaring to it. With one arm still holding her in place, Jaime could only laugh. "Isn't this a father's responsibility?" he asked in an utterly unserious manner. "I think it suits you rather well. Is that right?" He turned to his wife. She was smiling and her eyes shone with a warm hue. "It is." "Well," Jaime drawled, "I'll never protest trying to have them." He winked at her. Elia laughed and shook her head, her raven-colored hair beginning to slip out of their braids. Maya then decided his chin was more interesting, clasping it with both hands, and then began to explore the rest of his face with her small hands, which included poking his nose. When Jaime tried to stop her, she giggled, thinking it was a game, and that only further encouraged her. Jaime, remembering his time with Tyrion at this age, decided the best tactic was tickling. It was swift and effective. She burst out giggling and her face began to redden. She squirmed and protested, but her small hands couldn't deter him. "No fair," she squealed in between her laughter. "I can no longer tell who's the child," Elia observed. Jaime decided to give the girl a respite. She sagged against his chest. Her breathing was still a bit haggard, but she had quieted. He assumed she was tired out by all of the excitement as well as the late hour. "You handled her rather well." Elia had moved closer to him, one of her hands going through the girl's dark curls. "That is good to see." She kissed his cheek before her mouth went to his ear. "Because I'm pregnant." Chapter 26, Brotherhood. Notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Chapter text. 281 AC. Daeron. It had been more than a fortnight since he had been given the task to clear the Kingswood of the Brotherhood. The only thing he had found in most of that time was frustration. They struck his parties, but always melted back into the woods before he could bring the proper force to bear down upon them. It was grueling riding through the Kingswood, chasing shadows and fighting apparitions. He hated every second of it. At times, at his weakest, he wished father had given the order to Barristan or Arthur or even his brother, Roriger. "Anyone but me," he'd say, but he'd never allow that feebleness to linger. "I wanted this task. I needed it. After what the Brotherhood did to him. They attacked me." That sort of brazenness could not be ignored. They attacked Cersei. That anger burned even hotter. "Where are these fuckers?" Robert grumbled. He had gotten off his horse and was stomping around. They were standing in a field filled with colorful flowers and a few small trees that poked out here and there, tall and thin, dotting the landscape around them. In the distance, he could see the capital, King's Landing. The only interesting sights to him was the red keep that loomed over the city like some fierce, crimson beast, and the September of Baylor. The massive dome with its pristine 7 crystal towers rising around it. From here, it more resembled a crown than a September. "What did you expect, Robert?" Jaime drawled from atop his horse, which was draped in crimson silk and gold armor. "For them to come to us and then meekly fall on our swords." Daeron snorted at that image. He was not the only one thankful for the refreshing levity. Robert chuckled. "I don't use a sword, Lannister." He proudly pointed to where his warhammer was holstered. A simple display of his cousin's strength and fortitude at being able to carry such a heavy weapon with ease. Restless atop his horse, Daeron had dismounted and began to pace, but unlike his cousin he remained outwardly calm despite his anger and growing embarrassment. "I'm being mocked." He was certain of it. That was why he went no further. The prince bested by peasants. That's what the capital would say if he came back to King's Landing without beating these brigands. "I'll return a failure." He could already see it playing out in his mind, and father will send Rhaegar. His stomach soured at the images flickering across him of Rhaegar finding and beating the Brotherhood. The city would cheer him, give all their adoration for their beloved prince, who had saved them from the menace of the Kingswood Brotherhood while all too quickly whispering and snickering at how Daeron had failed. Rhaegar would probably write a stupid song about his victories. The thought only further angered him. He kicked a loose rock, watching it fly several feet in the air before it descended and disappeared into a batch of flowers. Sir Barristan's judgment was entirely silent, but the knight did raise a white eyebrow at him when he turned in his direction. He was standing the closest to Daeron, having gotten off his horse when Daeron had dismounted. The Kingsguard knight had already ensured a proper perimeter be set up for their position. Their guard was a mixture of Targaryen, Baratheon, Lannister, and even houses Tully and Arryn provided a few additional men. Sir Brynden had asked to stay to help root out the Brotherhood. The famous knight felt obligated to see justice done to those who killed his family's ward. Daeron had welcomed him, excited at being able to ride into battle with such a legend. The Blackfish had been the only one able to get any success against the Brotherhood. His superior scouting skills and the tricks that he deployed had been able to wrangle a few of the Brotherhood brigands, but that wasn't nearly good enough. "All this at my disposal and look at me," he observed, ashamed. "Some of the greatest houses of Westeros stand behind me and I've led them to nothing but failure." His eyes watching the banners of his friends' families sagging with little wind to carry them. The sight did not comfort him. "Mayhaps instead of men my father should have paid for a minstrel," Jaime observed dryly, "to have him walk through the Kingswood singing a certain song." Daeron smiled, appreciative of his friend's humor. He needed it to chase away his dark thoughts and darker mood. That was when he saw a pair of birds fly overhead. One red and one black, singing together while they flew into the forest and then out of view. Their bird song trailing behind them, a musical echo that too soon faded away. He took it as a good omen. He had to. "The Seven will bless us," he was more certain now while he waited for Sir Arthur and Ned to return from the city. After a fortnight of frustration, of these bandits continuing to evade them or strike on their terms and not his, Sir Arthur came to him with a suggestion. "My prince, the small folk appear to be helping them." Daeron would not forget his anger at this show of disloyalty. "They are hiding the brigands." "Yes, my prince." Sir Arthur and Ned had gone to investigate after another failed attempt to lure the Brotherhood out. The Gaul Daeron growled. This Brotherhood wasn't clever or sly, they were being aided by those whose loyalty should be to his family first and foremost. "They are distrustful," the Kingsguard put delicately. "Of who? Of what?" He did not think that gave them any right to betray his family. "Their prince." He scoffed at the ignorance that the small folk were cursed with. "Yet, they trust these killers and thieves." Sir Arthur waited until he had finished. "If we were to petition your father for more rights, they may help." "They may," he repeated angrily. "Mayhaps, they should help first as fealty demands." He crossed his arms over his chest. and then I shall take their petition to my father and speak on their behalf when loyalty has been proven. My prince. Ned stepped forward. I think Sir Arthur is correct. My father often spoke of the duty he has to our people, especially when they are suffering from times of hardships. We must always work to prove ourselves of their trust and loyalty. Daeron frowned, mulling over his friend's words. He did not really know nor care to know the daily lives of the small folk. If all they needed were a few minor things in order to secure their loyalty over the Brotherhood, then so be it. That wasn't what was most important to him. He had to beat the Brotherhood. I cannot come back as a failure. I must prove my worth. I must show it to them. Then let it be done. Now, they waited to see if Arthur's words, while well-intended, proved to be helpful. Daeron waited with whatever patience hadn't been drained away from him in these trying weeks. They were here. My prince. Sir Arthur tapped his horse to move forward. He bowed his head when he neared. It is done. He brandished the rolled-up parchment with the same pride as his family's famous ancestral sword, Dawn. King Aeus has answered their petitions. Even though it was what he wanted, he was still surprised that his father had agreed to it. They must have seen him in a good mood, he thought, or Lord Tywine saw to it. He had heard the hand of the king was beyond furious when he had been told of an attack against his family. He had further shown his displeasure by the dispatching of so many men to help them against the Brotherhood. The only thing we've been fighting so far is boredom, he thought reluctantly at the failures of his inability to quell these outlaws. Well done, Arthur. Daeron meant it, and you, Ned. He moved to go back to his horse. Let us spread the word that the small folk's complaints have been addressed by the crown. He announced to his gathered men. Let us pray these seeds bear good fruit. Dark Sister sang beautifully. The sword whistled, cutting through the air as Daeron directed it at the exposed side of his opponent. The Valyrian steel bit into the patchwork armor without difficulty and sunk deeper into the flesh below the shoulder. The bandit's shout was brief, since Dark Sister was quick to silence him. The body was held up loosely by his sword. He gave a quick tug to free it and the body crumpled to his feet. A dragon does not pity those beneath him. His father's voice reminded him as he stepped over another corpse he made. Satisfaction soared through him and he could not help but smile. He did not know what else to call it, but a thrill that he carried ever since the fighting broke out between his men and the Brotherhood. The first real fighting he was able to manage against the brigands. Sir Arthur's advice proved to be right. Since the petition had been put in effect and they paid for their supplies and information, the small folk proved their fealty. They refused to hide the bandits and outright told Daeron and his men some of their known haunts within the forest. This was why he found himself in the middle of a pitched skirmish, and enjoying every second of it. Finally, the frustration that had been seething underneath now began to pour out of him against any bandit he came across. He hacked and cut his way through the rabble. This piece of land that Daeron had made his battlefield. It was an old clearing deep within the forest that the Brotherhood used to allow them to rest without having to worry about being exposed. It was here where the small folk would deliver them food and other necessities when they still foolishly thought it wise to help bandits instead of dragons. Now, I'm delivering them justice. A roar that sounded more animal than man came from his other side, and Daeron didn't need to turn around to know it was his cousin. The following thump, which made the earth nearly shake, confirmed it. Another followed, but this came with a loud clang and a louder shout, with the hammer finding its mark. He and Robert had moved further ahead, thicker into the fighting. He was sure Barristan and Arthur did not approve, but Daeron didn't care. He felt no caution, no concern, he felt invincible. His feet moved to the war drum that hammered in his chest. Dark Sister was held loosely in his hand, dripping red, but he knew she still wished to sing. So do I. A bandit obliged, young and pockmarked, he charged him foolishly, fueled by the dreams of glory and riches for being the one to slay a Targaryen prince and to claim a Valyrian steel sword. He easily parried the bandit's clumsy strike. The sound of their swords clashing seemed to wake him from his haze, and his eyes widened when he took Daeron in. Realization and dread slowly creeping over his expression. Desperation made him a frenzied beast, lashing out to try to end the fight, but Daeron deftly avoided them. He was trained by the greatest knight in the Seven Kingdoms, and here was a bandit of a similar age with a poor sword and no armor. He thought to kill me, he mused, letting the bandit stay the aggressor. His sword swung wildly from side to side as if expecting Daron to walk forward and allow himself to be sliced in half. The bandit was beginning to grow tired after a few more attempts of that poor maneuver. His poor stamina betraying him. His breathing was haggard and his arms were shaking from the duress of fighting. Dark Sister was merciful, lazily pushing away his sword after an upward cut that more sagged than sailed. The Valyrian steel sword punched right through cloth and flesh, a lethal strike to the chest. The bandit was dead in an instant. The sword clattered to the ground, his body slumped forward. He carefully slipped Dark Sister out. For a heartbeat, he thought the bloody blade resembled a predator after feasting on a recent kill. It dripped red, with bits of flesh speckled on it. The corpse toppled and he stepped to the side to let it fall. Now, this is justice, cousin. Daron looked around to see him and Robert had ventured deeper into the forest than he first thought. They were no longer in the clearing. He couldn't even see any trace of it. All around them tall oaks and elms stood, old and proud. Their branches reached high, clawing towards the blue sky, leaves bristled in the wind, while a dapple of sunlight poured through, casting their surroundings in a mixture of light and shadows. Robert stood beside him. He was grinning, face flushed with sweat. His black hair was wet and messy. His heavy war hammer in one hand. There were specks of blood powdered across his chest plate. The black-crowned stag emblazoned on it was covered with crimson spots. Their many victims were strewn before them, blood splashing against the blanket of leaves and the gnarled roots. "My prince!" He heard shouting from behind, but it sounded far away. "We have been cut off." Daron realized his folly at once. "Cousin," he warned just as he heard the sound of crunching leaves approaching them. Good Robert understood, but he didn't sound the least bit bothered. "I was getting bored." The battle song calmed his nerves before it could prickle against his skin. He knew the noise was coming ahead, not behind. It isn't allies who are about to greet us. With that in mind, he carefully walked to his side to a large oak. He wanted to use the tree's massive base to shield him from any hidden archers ahead of them. "Targaryen!" A voice called out to them, two shadows emerging from the forest's primal darkness. Into the splintering sunlight to reveal themselves, Daron recognized them to be Simon Tywin and Big Belly Ben, two of the more infamous outlaws that belonged to the Brotherhood. "Your family has shat on mine long enough." Simon Tywin was the proclaimed leader of the Kingswood Brotherhood. He was proudly wearing his family's colors. Upon his armor was the black-winged heart of his house. His dark eyes took Daron in, and the prince saw nothing but hate burning behind that gaze. Below the man's large and hooked nose, his lips formed a sneer. "You may have defeated the Brotherhood." His voice was rough and laced with indifference, "but killing you," he pointed his sword towards Daron. "I can think of no better reward." It wasn't Simon who charged forward, but the man beside him, Big Belly Ben. A name well earned. He was nearly as tall as Robert, while his armor could not conceal his bulging gut. His face was fat and the coarse brown beard that covered his cheeks and many chins failed to hide it. In his large arms he carried an equally large war axe and had it raised, moving towards Daron. "He's mine." Cousin Robert's heavy footsteps moved to meet the challenger, and the two large men clashed to a loud clatter of steel and shouts. The warriors resembled rocks in size and demeanor as they traded blows and curses. The ground seemed to shake and rumble beneath their large frames. The battle song, it nursed him. Inside Daron could hear its soothing tune, rippling beneath his skin. His muscles were quivering. "He's coming to bleed," they sang, "he's coming to die. I did not think you'd take the bait so quickly." He ignored his words and instead focused on the lessons that Barristan instilled into him. "I wondered when the Mad King would send one of his sons to deal with us," he taunted. "That's all I ever wanted, you see. Your family ruined mine and I will return the favor." Then the time for words was over and the time for swords had begun. Daron's body moved by instinct. He raised Dark Sister to block an upward slash. His sword, his stance, his footwork, all of it seemed to move without him needing to tell them. The battle song was washing over him, and despite the duel he found himself in, he felt nothing but calm and control. Simon feinted to his left, a subtle move, but one the prince had seen from Sir Barristan more times than he could count, and it was far more cunning coming from the legendary knight. Dark Sister reached out to deter the attack, sending his opponent's sword in the wrong direction. Simon recovered, moving himself deftly out of reach in case Dark Sister tried to lunge forward where it would have been unopposed. Anger began to darken Simon's face. Black heart, indeed, Daeron observed of his opponent. He could hear Baristan's whisper inside his head, pointing out the flaw in Simon's defense, as their swords spat and sang to one another, clashing angrily again and again. He's losing his focus, my prince. You must always be aware. Always. I want to watch the life leave your eyes, Simon growled. Their swords broke free and he saw his chance. Dark Sister flicked past the enemy's sword for a quick strike, the Valyrian steel cut through the armor just below his right shoulder. He staggered. Then you should have used an arrow. In one swift motion Dark Sister sliced off Simon Toyne's head. Dismay was forever etched on Simon's face. His head hit the ground with a squish and thud. A burst of red bloomed spraying out in a stream before the body tumbled over. A loud, wet crunch made him turn to see Robert pulling his weapon out of the now corpse of Big Belly Ben. The chest had been caved in from the weight and power of his warhammer. You live, cousin. Robert observed, barely flicking his eyes up from his dead opponent. I do, Daeron replied, your concern is touching. Robert chuckled, I'm not one of your bloody Kingsguard knights. The mirthful shine in his blue eyes belied his words. Daeron smiled, but it did not linger with the mention of said knights. He knew Barristan and Arthur would not be pleased by allowing himself to get separated, but first he and Robert had to return and hope his friends and men fared as well as they did. Jaime. These are not dummies. Jaime ducked under the clumsy swipe of the bandit's shield. These are not the wooden men that filled the training yards of Casterly Rock and King's Landing. Those that took your attacks in silence. They did not move, they did not react while you hacked away at them. In your fight against them they were nothing but mute observers. Jaime let his sword cut low, going under the shield and finding purchase in the man's torso. He dragged the sword upwards, ignoring the man's cries, until the sword came out and the man fell backwards dead before he hit the ground. He let out a shaky breath. No, he thought, these were people, sons and brothers, husbands and uncles. They groaned and shouted, cursed and cried. They bled and whimpered. They died. Jaime didn't look where the body fell. His eyes were scanning the battlefield. The Brotherhood had buckled under the combined forces that Prince Daeron had brought to bear down on them. Without the help of the small folk to help and hide them, they were doomed. The fighting was coming to an end. The Brotherhood had broken, some had surrendered, some fled, but most had died. He looked for his friend, wanting to congratulate him on their triumph, but that was when he noticed he could not spot Prince Daeron in the clearing. Robert's gone too, he realized. He saw as Barristan and Arthur were moving swiftly through the forest where the shadows of the wood soon engulfed the white-clad figures. Jaime made to join them, knowing they must be seeking the prince. He was about to step out of the clearing and into the surrounding woods when a wheezy laugh brought him to a complete stop. He reacted without thinking, his sword coming up just in time to block a sword that seemed to materialize out of the darkness. Its holder did not remain hidden. Stepping out of the shadows, draped in black, Jaime knew who it was at once, the Smiling Knight. His helm was equally black, neither ornate nor unique. It looked like the helm of a common guardsman. The only noticeable trait was the large red smile painted on the front. It was a smear of dried blood. Jaime didn't have time to reflect on this unexpected opponent before he was forced to meet the knight's next attack. He moved left and right, swiftly, but each strike had unexpected strength behind it. The Smiling Knight lived up to his reputation, Jaime decided, dodging one of the outlaw's blows. He showed talent within every aspect of the sword, and Jaime found himself remaining on the defensive. He never had time to counter, or strike because he was forced to dodge or deflect the unrelenting attack from the outlaw. That's a lot of gold you have. The Smiling Knight's voice was strangely normal to Jaime's ears, besides the muffled lilt from it coming behind a closed helm. Pretty gold makes for shitty armor. You can test it yourself. The Smiling Knight obliged. Jaime could feel his heartbeat pounding, but his hands remained steady. His grip on his sword was certain, and his confidence did not waver despite the clear talent of his enemy. The knight's black cloak was tattered, it fluttered behind him like broken wings. There was a twitchiness in his movement. It was neither smooth nor refined as Jaime had seen in others. It was irregular, and that was when Jaime knew what he had to do. After blocking another blow, Jaime became the compulsive one. He threw most of his weight behind his sword when the swords clashed. The smiling knight stumbled, his feet nearly tripping over themselves. He got caught unaware, and in that Jaime made him pay. Keeping his own balance, Jaime's sword followed in a vertical slash that caught the smiling knight's unprotected spot near his armpit. The sword bit deep, and the knight hissed in pain. Blood began to stream down his armor and the knight faltered. Jaime's second attack was the fatal one. The sword slid in between the chest plate and the helm, cutting at the neck to give the smiling knight a second red smile. He shuddered, and collapsed to his knees. Red spittle leaked from the helm. He looked up at Jaime for barely a heartbeat before his legs unwound under him and he hit the ground and stilled. "Wait, wait, wait." His wife's voice pulled him out of the clearing within the forest. Jaime blinked in the dim firelight of their guest chambers at Storm's End. He was no longer looking down at the red smile of the smiling knight, but looking at the warm smile of his wife, Elia Lannister. "Yes," he replied simply to her interruption. They were seated by the small table near the glowing hearth. An empty bottle of Arbor Gold stood between them. Jaime would have liked to say they split it, but that was not the truth. The effects of the drink were welcomed, and he was proud to say that he hadn't slurred any words in his retelling of them taking down the Kingswood Brotherhood. After successfully dealing with the Kingswood Brother, it had taken them a few days to return to Storm's End. When they did, Robert had unsurprisingly insisted upon throwing a feast to celebrate their victory. Eventually, when the hour was late and the night dark, he and Elia excused themselves. In the quiet of the room, Elia had asked him to tell her what had happened. She wanted to hear it from him and not the gossip from the soldiers or the retelling of his friends or from the others who had witnessed it. Never one to deny his wife, he obliged her. It was not an easy feat. The Arbor Gold helped, but he was not skilled in storytelling. "I remember it, but can I truly retell it?" "That's what happened." His wife's amber eyes glowed in the candlelight. Jaime sipped from his glass before answering. "The fighting doesn't last long." He saw the bottom of his glass. "It's not at all how the minstrels tell it, where duels can last hours. The fighting, it's over in seconds, mayhaps a few minutes." He shrugged. He honestly did not know. "When I was fighting," he trailed off. He was finding it difficult to properly describe what he saw, what he felt. It bordered on frustrating. She must have sensed it as she reached across the table to put her hand atop one of his. "Some of what you said just doesn't make sense," she said gently. Jaime tried not to frown at his wife's criticism. "How does the smell?" He never let her finish. He had gotten up and silenced her complaint with a kiss. Jaime, her eyes did not match her resigned tone. He smirked at her. "I'm not a minstrel, wife. I cannot put it all into words, and when I try." He shrugged and then finished his glass. "No one wants to hear about the shit and blood," he thought, "or the piss-stained breeches of the first man I killed in that fight." He frowned down at his empty cup as if silently willing it to refill. She wrapped herself around him from behind. Her embrace was soothing. "Forgive me," she murmured against him. "Please finish, I want to hear the end. Even the embellishments." "Of course, dear," was her supportive reply. "Jaime." Prince Daeron had stepped away from some of his Targaryen guards to approach him. Dark Sister was in hand and his 2 Kingsguard knights were behind him. The sword, the knights, and the black armor with the gold enameled 3-headed dragon of his house all together made his friend look like the young dragon come again. "My prince," Jaime greeted his friend. "We did it." Daeron was grinning. He clapped Jaime on the shoulder when he was close enough. Sir Barristan remained standing behind the prince, but Sir Arthur had peeled off and moved in the direction where Robert and Ned were talking. Or from here it looked like Robert was boasting and Ned was listening in wry resignation. "We did." Jaime smiled. "They say you killed Simon Toyne." "I did." Daeron looked pleased. "It seems he attacked my caravan because he wanted a Targaryen prince." "He got one," Jaime observed dryly. "Indeed, he did." Daeron's smile at that was sharper than Valyrian steel. He then looked to where the smiling knight lay slain. "I heard you were the one to fight and kill him." "I was." "Well done." Jaime. Sir Barristan spoke first. "He may have been an outlaw, but he was a skilled knight. It would take mettle and talent to defeat him. Thank you, Sabaristan. Jaime found himself standing a bit straighter upon receiving praise from such a legendary figure. You have served with distinction and have shown valor on the battlefield, and I have seen firsthand your character to know you are a man of quality. Sabaristan stepped forward with a friendly smile. Jaime Lannister, kneel. His body moved to obey while his mind was reeling. It was happening. Those words repeated in his head, his excitement thrummed through him. I'm to be knighted. Father had offered before he was married, but Jaime had refused. I want to earn my knighthood, he told him. It should not come to me in the form of a wedding present. The soil was damp when his knees pressed down into it. He looked up to see Sabaristan had taken to stand in front of him, but then he saw his friend. Wait, Jaime was confused. What of Prince Daeron? I was already knighted. His expression showed his appreciation for Jaime's question. Sabaristan knighted me after finding me and Robert. He paused, turning back to the knight he squired for so many years. Well, first he scolded me and then threatened me, he added lightly, but afterwards he knighted me. Baristan's chuckle was dry. The prince tells it true. His tone was all pride for his former squire. He earned his knighthood the same as you, Jaime Lannister. Wait, Jaime stopped Sabaristan before he could begin. He was surprised by his own interruption. I mean no insult, Sabaristan, for you are the finest knight in the Seven Kingdoms, but could it be possible for Prince Daeron to knight me? They had talked about this for so long. They practiced together, sparred together for so many years. It was always the two of them, whether King's Landing or Casterly Rock. Their trials were one. Jaime could not think of a more fitting end for them than for his truest friend to knight him. We're brothers. Sabaristan didn't look the least bit offended. I understand, he smiled, and nodded before stepping back, and Prince Daeron stepped forward, dark sister in hand. You honor me, Jaime. The prince's voice was difficult to describe. Put your sword upon his right shoulder, my prince, Sabaristan instructed. Prince Daeron may have been newly knighted, so he was not fully aware of all the formalities that it took. Dark sister rested on Jaime's right shoulder. He looked up to meet Prince Daeron's gaze, who offered him a friendly nod before repeating after Sabaristan. Jaime Lannister, do you swear before the eyes of gods and men to defend those who cannot defend themselves? Just like in the stories, he thought, the brave knights who fought the evil and the corrupt. To protect all women and children. Elia, his mind's eye went to his beautiful wife, and he thought of their child growing inside her. I would die for them. To obey your captains, your liege lord, and your king. It was his father he thought of first, and then his friend, the very one who was knighting him. And only after them did his mind show him Aerys and then Rhaegar, his king and the crown prince. To fight bravely when needed and do such tasks as are laid upon you, however hard or humble or dangerous they may be. I do, he swore. Dark sister moved to his left shoulder. Then arise, Prince Daeron told him. Arise, Sir Jaime Lannister. The touch on his shoulder was not Dark sister's blade, but his wife's fingers. The muddy ground of the Kingswood was no longer beneath his knees. He was lying back on the soft mattress in their chambers at Storm's End with Elia beside him. I am so proud of you, husband. She leaned up to kiss his cheek. Her eyes were shimmering with warmth. It's what you always wanted. She was so happy for him. I did, he admitted, wrapping his arms around her, but being here with Elia, he thought about the vows they made at the September in Casterly Rock, and remembering her telling him she was pregnant. Those were the memories that truly made him happy, that he cherished above all else. And being knighted could not even begin to compare to those. My dreams have changed, he realized, but he couldn't be happier. Notes. I probably gave the Brotherhood way too many members, but it is what it is. This didn't have the canon altercations B/C. This isn't canon. This is an or. Regardless, sorry to Barristan and Arthur for your diminished roles. Thanks for the support. Spectre for Hire. Chapter 27, Secrets. Notes. I don't really update on Mondays, but here I am with a new chapter. With everything going on right now, please don't forget to be smart and stay safe. To those who are still having to go out there to work during all of this, you have my utmost gratitude and admiration for what you're risking and sacrificing. Please, be safe. See the end of the chapter for more notes. Chapter text. 281 AC. Circe. I shouldn't be too early. Circe was walking through the Red Keep towards the chambers of Princess Lila. Her future good sister had invited her for a luncheon. If I did not leave then, she looked down to make sure her dress wasn't ruffled. She ran her hand over the red silk just to be sure. I never would have left. She smiled at her betrothed's skills of persuasion. When she had told him of the invite, he had extended his own offer. She felt the heat cool in her belly, remembering the feel of his lips on hers. His fingers going through her hair. His other hand holding her close and steady to him. Sadly, they had been interrupted. We're always interrupted. She sighed at the frustration of being so close to him, of feeling his heart beneath her fingers, her mouth on his, only for it to be tugged away in an instant. It was cruel to be denied what was soon to be hers. One flesh. One heart. One soul. Soon, she reminded herself to stem the disappointment that bubbled up. It was the sound of voices that brought her attention back to the corridor she was walking in. She was close to the princess chambers. She just had to turn the corner and they'd be at the end of the new corridor. Princess Lila set it for the top of the hour, the first voice said. We still have some time. That is good, the second voice responded. I still don't understand why she's doing this. The voices were both female. Circe went into the nearby alcove to ensure she couldn't be seen. Her curiosity had her slide into its shadow and listen. She was able to put names to the voices. They were Jane Went and Layla Hightower, two of Princess Lila's ladies-in-waitings. Jane was the second voice. She was Lord Walter Went's only daughter, and Layla was one of the daughters of Lord Lytton Hightower. It seems pointless, Jane added when Layla didn't respond right away. No, it isn't. Yes, it is, Jane insisted. She told us so. She did say Prince Roriger would handle it, Layla conceded, but she still needs to appear as if it's still going to happen. But it's not, Jane giggled, and neither know it. Circe stayed where she stood. Her back pressed against the wall. Be quiet, Layla hushed her. Their footfalls were getting closer. Why? Jane didn't sound like she had a care in the world. I can't help but laugh, which she then did. Father always said the Lannisters were too proud. It will be amusing, but you mustn't babble so much. Now you sound like Elbereth, Jane teased. She must have hit a nerve since she was giggling again. You did see him when he was here. There was a pause, with the only sound being their soft footsteps. I did, Layla said reluctantly, but your uncle interrupted us, she said while Jane continued to giggle at her friend's expense. Mayhaps, you should thank my Uncle Oswald, Jane replied. Why would your father approve of such a match? Layla huffed. The prince, she stopped herself. Never mind, she sounded frustrated. You've turned me into a gossip almost as bad as you. Circe saw their shadows before she saw them, and she stilled, holding her breath just as they came into view. The two women walked right past her. They were too distracted with their own conversation to even glance in Circe's direction. Jane laughed. She sounded delighted and not insulted at the accusation. Princess Lila has already excused me from attending the luncheon. They turned and were now going down the corridor that led to the princess chambers. Their voices became more distant. You are fortunate, Layla grumbled. I do not look forward to a meal with Lady Circe. Jane took no pity on her friend. The perks of being a giggling gossip, as you've often called me. Circe eased herself out of the alcove, staying close to the wall. She needed to hear more. I suppose the princess is right to worry that you'll ruin it, Layla sounded resigned. How can I not? Jane asked her, to sit there and smile and bob my head when she excitedly talks about Prince Daeron. Jane's tone was mocking, all the while never knowing that their betrothed. Jane's voice was muffled. It sounded as if Layla had clapped her hand over her friend's mouth. Be quiet, Layla hissed. Their voices then faded away altogether when they entered the bedchambers of Princess Lila before closing the door behind them. Circe awoke with a start. She was no longer standing in that alcove in the corridor of the Red Keep. She was back in her guest chambers at Storm's End. She pushed back the covers. Her hands were shaking, but it had nothing to do with the slight chill in the air. She padded across the room to the basin of water that the servants had placed for her the night before. The windows within the castle were mostly thin slits, which meant little light was able to shine through, and the moonbeams that did cast her room in shadows that reminded her of the bars of a cell. Circea dipped her hands into the cool water. She pooled some of it and leaned down before splashing her face with the water. It was brief, but refreshing. The droplets of water trickling down her face. Her hands were still shaking when she put them in again to repeat it. The water felt colder this time, falling down her cheeks like tears. She dabbed at her face before sitting down at the table. Circea was pleased to see the bottle of wine she requested was there waiting. Her hands were no longer shaking when she poured herself a glass of the Arbor Gold. She sat there in the silent darkness of her chambers before taking her first sip. Not wanting to dwell on what woke her up, her eyes looked around the rustic furniture that the past lords of Storm's End had placed in here for their guests. It appeared they cared little for luxury. The chairs facing the fireplace were simply crafted with small cushions adorning the back and bottom. They were gold-colored canvas with rows of black stags running along it. The hearth was small, carved out of the stone, and flanking both sides of it were identical-looking crowned stags. When she looked closer she realized the one on the left had one of its ears chipped off and its nose was more worn down. Jane Went's voice bled into her observations, puncturing through like daggers. Circea took a longer sip. She hadn't needed them to finish to understand what they were saying. She had heard enough. They are trying to prevent my marriage to Daeron. She could see Jane's smirking face flickering before her, laughing at her, mocking her. Did you really think you could marry him? Yes, she answered, I will marry him. She could still remember her anger at hearing those simpering fools. At how they mocked and giggled at her family's name and at her. Circea had wanted to dash out of the shadows like a lioness stalking her prey to show them what happened when one so stupidly crossed a predator. Circea had restrained herself and then had to endure that horrid luncheon with Princess Lila, who smiled and complimented her, talking about how excited she was that they'd soon be good sisters and Circea would be Aegon's aunt. Quite the performance. Circea had wanted to reach across the table and strangle the princess. You dare try to take Daeron from me? She'd hiss when the girl's face would turn purple beneath her grip. Instead, she was forced to play along to this little act that Princess Lila was performing. They truly think to cleave me from him. Her heart lurched, the fear and anger weaving tightly with one another in her belly. It was all she could do not to sob or scream. It was such a terrible burden to endure these past few weeks since she learned of it. For her to pretend that her betrothal wasn't being threatened by those who should not meddle. That there were schemes trying to sever her from the man she loved. Love, the word had come to her so quickly she nearly overlooked it. Circea thought it with such certainty that its revelation was almost forgotten. Love. She said it again, tasting the word. It was sweeter than any wine. She felt the heat filling her heart. The smile that was so quick to come to her lips when she thought about him. Yes, she was almost dizzy with giddiness in seeing the truth in her declaration. This was love, but she knew it wasn't all giddy smiles, there was an intense devotion. A fierceness that was stronger than any lion. It made her heart rage and pound like a storm churning in her chest at them thinking they could divide her from Daeron. He is mine. I am his. Those were the words. And cursed be they who would seek to tear them asunder. Circea couldn't show any of her pain, and none of her wrath. It was even more challenging to hide it from him. She feared what he thought of her in her lapses of silence or solemnness. How distracted she had been, how forceful her smiles were when all she wanted to do was kiss and embrace him. I will tell him. She had vowed, but the time was never given to her. Upon leaving the capital for the Stormlands they were set on by brigands. He was then given the orders to ride into the Kingswood and dispatch this band of rogues and thieves. He's here now, she perked up in her seat. The hour was late, but he was back. He and the others had arrived just today where Robert threw a feast to celebrate, and amidst the music and laughter, she pressed herself to him in their dancing and her hand clasped tightly to his while they ate. How tempted she was to lean across to him to tell him what she heard, but she could not risk it. It was clear Rhaegar had his friends well concealed. If he was tipped then he'd surely hasten them and she wouldn't have time to stop them. He'd take him from me. Circea sipped the rest of her glass, but the Arbor Gold did not taste as sweet when the idea of her and Daeron's betrothal being broken played across her mind and all but trampled across her heart. She really thinks she'll marry the prince? Jane's voice was ringing in her ears. Circe hurled the glass against the stone wall with a quiet roar. It shattered when it hit the stone, glass shards raining down onto the floor, glimmering when they caught the orange glow of the flames. She took some satisfaction in imagining it was Jane's face when she threw the glass and that it hit that ditzy girl right in her freckled face. She nearly smiled, but she didn't. Circe moved across her room where her robe had been placed before she had gone to sleep. She slipped it on with her mind made up. She tightened the silky string to keep her robe securely to her and to conceal what her lacy shift did not. Circe was aware of the potential scandal of her being caught, but she had no choice. I won't wait any more. The door opened with barely a sound. Circe peered out into the corridor to see the torches were lit. There were no guards in sight. They mostly stood at the entrances and exits of the guest wings. They also would perform random patrol throughout the night to ensure everything and everyone was safe and secure. Before she could change her mind, she slipped between the small gap she had made and carefully closed it behind her. She needed no lantern since the torches illuminated her way. Circe did not think he'd have guards outside, but the thought that they might be there did cause her to slow her steps. She felt the caution trying to tether her to her room, to try to tug her back. No, Circe kept walking. When else will I have the time and the quiet to speak to him? No answer was forthcoming. I will dream no more of Jane's mockery and Layla's scorn. She needed to tell him. Help me with this burden, tell me that they cannot do it. That you won't let them. Circe had wanted to tell her father, but there had been no time. She overheard of it the day before they left the capital and he was busy ruling the 7 kingdoms. She knew she could press to get him privately, but she feared that would get back to Roriger and his friends. Will he suspect that I know if I suddenly demand my father's presence, alone? She didn't know, so she decided against it. She'd tell him when they returned from the Stormlands after they inspected Summerhall, her castle with Daeron. Jane's giggling echoed inside her head. There is no marriage. There will be no castle. There will be no more tongue-wagging, Circe growled. She wanted to show Jane the folly of her disrespect and arrogance. I'll make the bards write a new song. Circe felt the faint traces of a smile on her lips. After, Jane does rhyme with pain. His door was in sight and she let out a relieved breath to see it was unattended. There were no pale cloaks of the Kingsguard or the familiar sight of the Targaryen dragon that the men-at-arms wear. She quickly covered the distance, not wanting to try her luck. One hand was pressed against the door, the other on the handle, but she hesitated. It was a bad time for the doubt to return. What will I say to excuse my nightly intrusion? What will I see? She felt the heat creep into her face. That temptation was present. It grew with each day just as much as their frustration every time they were caught. Now, we'd be alone. Circe tempered it. She would not risk her love of him if their betrothal was set aside because of her lust for him. Before she could change her mind, she opened the door. Circe. Daeron. She had all but a quick glimpse around the room before her eyes found him sitting by a chair near the fireplace. Surprised by her very late and unannounced visit, he stood up to greet her. He was surprisingly decently dressed. She ignored the slight pang of disappointment. He was wearing a loose black tunic and breeches. In front of him was a plate of food and a tankard. I need to talk to you. She felt better already when his hand was on her back. Very well. He led her to the chair beside him. He was more calm than she expected at her barging in on him at this late hour. Are you well? No, yes. She could feel the cool air caressing her bare legs. When she sat down, the fabric of her robe hitched up slightly. She was quick to adjust it, but not before feeling his eyes on her. She looked up to see his surprise had melted into admiration. She felt herself flush beneath his heated gaze. He abruptly cleared his throat and then looked away as if to stem his own wicked thoughts and lust. What is it you need to talk about? She answered after a short pause. I've been meaning to tell you for a while. I see. He distracted himself with the food on his plate. He took a loud bite of his apple. I was hungry. He sensed her unasked question, and the kitchens are never closed to a prince. He flashed her a grin to explain why he was still up at this hour, dressed and eating as if it was he was having an early supper. He offered her his plate, which had some grapes, berries, bread, and a bit of beef. It hardly looked like a meal for a prince. She picked up a few grapes and nodded her thanks. Is this why you've been? He tried to find the right word to delicately explain her behavior. Yes, she confirmed, and I'm sorry for that. Her fingers felt clumsy in her lap and the grapes were threatening to spill out of her grip. She could feel his stare, but a part of her didn't want to meet it, afraid of the disappointment she might see, or worse, the hurt, his hurt. I wanted to tell you, she continued. I wanted to tell you as soon as I heard, she confessed, still not looking up, and hating herself for this cowardice. I am better than this. I am a Lannister, but her eyes remained on the grapes in her hand. But I couldn't, because I didn't have a chance to truly speak with you alone since we left the capital. So here you are. There was amusement in his voice, at my chambers during the hour of the bat. Or is it the eel? I'm not certain. She wasn't either. Yes, here I am. Cersei finally looked up to see his beautiful eyes were on her. To her relief, there was no disappointment or hurt in his gaze. She had always loved them, even when she was foolishly smitten with Rhaegar. It is about your brother. His face darkened and her own mood followed with it, dampening her temptations. Rhaegar. His tone had changed just as quickly. Yes, she confirmed, and then she told him everything she overheard that day between Jane Went and Layla Hightower. Damn him, Daeron snarled when she had finished. He was pacing in front of her. Damn his plots, he cursed, and damn his prophecies. She was not sure she had ever seen him so angry before. His hands were at his sides where he flexed his fingers into a fist and then unclenched them again and again. I hate him. He paused to turn in her, his face softened when their eyes met. If he thinks I'd let him come between us. He shook his head, then he's a bigger fool than I thought. Cersei took pleasure in his passion for her, for them. He fights for me just as fiercely. What will you do? I don't know, he frowned. If we were to get married sooner, would Rhaegar actually leave us be? They both knew the answer, but neither said it aloud, the fear that this could just be the beginning. Daeron walked over to his bed where he sat down on its edge and sighed. She followed him, disheartened by his change. He suddenly looked so weary. She could still see the anger with how his body tensed and his clenched jaw, but there was more to his appearance that she didn't want to see, because it hurt to see. Her chest tightened. Daeron. She said his name softly. What is it? He didn't answer. She said his name again, but his body didn't even stir and she wondered if he even heard her. She crouched in front of him, clasping her hands in his. He looked down at her then. I hate him. I know, she said soothingly. It had been a story she slowly learned from him. It was given to her piece by piece, the life he lived in the Red Keep. How his brother ignored him while his father confused and frightened him. Aerys would charm him one morning and then curse him at supper. He'd embrace him and call him son, but then an hour would pass in which he'd threaten to have him sent to the Black Cells. That was no life for a child. His father's delusions and outbursts poisoned Daeron's confidence and Rhaegar destroyed what was left. He couldn't see who he truly was, she suspected when he saw himself in the looking glass. He saw that frightened, lonely boy, but he wasn't that. If only he could see what she saw when she looked at him. That was a man who would be a great king. I'd do anything for you, for us. I know, she felt the intensity in his stare. The sincerity in his tone filled her with such warmth. And that's why I love you. She finished her declaration by kissing him, wanting to put everything she felt about him into it so that he could understand how much he meant to her. They fell backwards onto his bed. They never let go of each other. Lyanna. My brother has the worst timing, Lyanna grumbled. Robert had interrupted her long-awaited sparring session with Cersei to tell her that her brother was looking for her. She had wanted to ignore it because she'd rather fight, but she saw the seriousness in Robert's expression, realizing this wasn't something she could ignore, so she reluctantly left the training yard and followed Robert. The spar was over. She frowned. What do you mean? She thought back to it. Lyanna had thought she was doing rather well against her. Robert's chuckling told her differently. The Lady Cersei was poised to parry that strike you do. He then mimicked it as if he was wielding an invisible sword, which would free her to then disarm and defeat you. He then proceeded to show said moves that would have led to Lyanna's loss. Her pride rankled at how he said it so simply and with such confidence. You rely too much on. Well, she cut him off, feeling flustered and annoyed by how he talked about her fighting. I didn't know you were the master at arms of the castle as well as its lord. She chided herself as soon as she said it, hearing how childish she sounded. Peace, Lionel. He held up his arms as if he was the one yielding to her in a spar. I imagine you train with Benjen. At her nod, he continued, a good lad, but he is not Prince Daeron. He consoled her. There's no shame in defeat. She wasn't sure why he was being so kind to her. She didn't deserve it, especially with how she had just been so snide to him. Thank you, she told him, trying her best not to mumble. And I'm sorry, she added, you were trying to help me and I was being. He snorted before she could finish, but instead of feeling annoyed, she felt her lips betray her by curving upwards. He was very confusing and charming, and infuriating. That's what she decided. As well as not wanting to think about it or him any further. Do you know why the Tullys left? No. The unusual part was not them leaving, since they were not the first to do so. Lord Jon Arryn had already departed Storm's End. He left a little less than a week ago, right after the prince's party had returned from their victory over the Kingswood Brotherhood. The Tullys' departure had been different. Theirs was so strange and sudden. They had abruptly left 2 days ago. She heard a servant saying the Blackfish had received a rider. Whatever message that had been delivered had caused him to order their party to pack and leave at once. Lyanna had missed most of the excitement. All she was able to see was the Tully banners billowing in the afternoon breeze when their carriage and riders left Storm's End. Does anyone know why they left? The Tullys, he answered dryly. She rolled her eyes. Lyanna was unsure why the Lord of Storm's End had decided to play messenger for her brother. Why did you come get me? Don't you have actual lordship duties to attend to? She gestured to the very castle they were walking into. I have Maester Crescent tend to most of it. He said it as if it was normal for a Lord Paramount to shirk all his duties and place them on his Maester's shoulders. I have Stannis too. And that leaves you to escort me. It does. He didn't quite meet her gaze when he added. I wanted to talk to you. Oh. His tone was different. There was none of that mirth or confidence or charm that he seemed to carry with him, as effortless as his warhammer. It reminded her of the conversation she had had with him in the Godswood before he rode out with Ned and the others to handle the Kingswood Brotherhood. She had seen a different Robert than the one she was used to. Lyanna had found it more disarming than his easy charm and quick smiles. It had confused her. He had spoken to her about things that she doubted he ever said to Ned or Prince Daeron. Yes, I wanted to ask you something. What? She was acutely aware of her growing heartbeat. I wanted your permission to write to you. My permission? She blinked. Yes, he answered, if you were to give it, I'd then of course write to your father and ask. He was speaking as if he thought he needed to explain it all to her, and if he gave it then I'd hope to write to you. But you asked me first. He hesitated. Not entirely. He gave her a sideways glance. I talked to Ashura first. Ned's wife. That wasn't the answer she was expecting. Yeah, I thought she'd be a wise and needed ally in case you said yes and then Ned found out. She was smiling, knowing that he was right. Ashura could easily handle her brother and his moods. Lyanna was certain he'd be experiencing several if or when he found out that Robert asked to write to her. She still didn't answer him. She couldn't help it. She was too curious. She wanted to know more. She had to. What would you want to write about? Embroidery tips. Fool, she nudged his arm, but it was like a kitten pawing at a bear. It wasn't threatening, just amusing. It made her realize the plain differences between them, of how tall and big he was and how easily she could get lost in his shadow with her small and lean frame. Robert's laugh sounded like the distant rumble of thunder. I'd have you write of your riding in the Wolf's Wood. I'd hear how your sparring with Benjen was going. You know, he shrugged, unsure how to make it any plainer, things worth writing about. And you? She didn't hate the idea of telling him about her riding or her fighting. I'd write to you of home, he answered. I'd tell you of all the sights you haven't seen here in the Stormlands, and there are many. He sounded so proud of the land he ruled, even if he didn't take the time to actually try to rule it. It's a pity that you cannot see them. So I have to trust your skill with a quill. She found herself teasing. Robert chuckled. I'm afraid you do. They were climbing the Tower of Storm's End. With a few more steps they'd be on the guest chamber's floor where she and her family were staying. And she paused to ask it even though she already knew the answer, why would you want to write to me? They reached the guest wing and the 2 Baratheon guards on duties. They dipped their heads and opened the doors for them. They walked in without speaking, and she glanced in his direction to see his expression had none of his confidence or self-assurance. He actually looks a little nervous. It was surprising. She almost found it endearing. I'd wish for you to be my wife, Lyanna, he said bluntly. I'd want the honor of it and all the other blessings that would come with our marriage. Like finally being Ned's brother. Perhaps it was wrong for it to be the first thing to say to him upon his declaration, but it had to be said. It lurked in the shadows of her mind, she wasn't a fool. She knew how much Robert loved him. Now, by marrying her he got to have what he always seemed to want, the chance to be Ned's actual brother. He frowned. She couldn't tell for certain, but she thought he looked insulted. Surprised. There were warring emotions on his face while his blue eyes looked distant and distracted by other thoughts or feelings. If you think that is why I truly wish to marry you, he said slowly. Then I will rescind the question now and we'll not speak of this again. He actually sounded wounded. Robert, she didn't know what to say. This was all so strange, but yet so familiar. It was expected and unexpected. Lyanna knew this was to be her fate. They were chains she struggled with since she was old enough to understand what a marriage would mean for her. It wasn't just about leaving behind her home and family at Winterfell, or losing her name, it was about having to go somewhere else to be with someone else, and to be entirely dependent on him. It was a feeling she didn't want. Lyanna didn't care if that was how it was done, it didn't make it any less unfair in her mind. The husband would have none of the same restraints. He was allowed to continue his dalliances, to spill his seed to any woman who caught his fancy. She'd be this man's doll, his toy for him to control, and the thought made her stomach clench and anger to flood her chest. They want my hand, my name, and my womb. They'd ignore the rest. Or worse, try to shear the parts of her that they didn't like. Lyanna felt something swell in her throat. They'd keep me in their castle, my every step would be monitored. The future played out in front of her and she saw how helpless she was to be controlled by a husband. Robert hadn't tried to press her. He left her alone so she could think. Even when they reached her brother's chambers, she was surprised to feel that a part of her wanted to think he'd be different than those sorts of husbands. He wouldn't be like the nightmares of the fat and vicious lords with grubby hands, leering at her, while she was shackled to his seat. Lyanna wanted to believe it, but she couldn't ignore what else she saw and knew of him. Robert was lazy and uncaring about ruling or running a household. He already had one bastard girl, was she foolish enough to think it would be his last? If he was writing to her at Winterfell about how he missed her company, would he send that letter before sending for a woman to warm his bed? Her stomach twisted painfully. She couldn't bear it. Lyanna Stark knew it was foolish to want something different, to expect something different in her marriage, but it still couldn't stop her from feeling it. How many storms will come between us, Robert? She asked. I don't wish to share my husband. As foolish as that sounds, she let out a humorless laugh, perfectly aware of the role she was supposed to play. Your reputation is well known. He winced, but he didn't protest any of it. Could you do that, Robert? She asked quietly. He looked poised to give an immediate answer, but then he stopped himself. He was frowning. It was after another few beats of silence did he finish, I don't know. Lyanna appreciated his honesty, but she still walked away. Then you have my answer. She didn't look back, and left the Lord of Storm's End where he stood to slip into her brother's room. The first thing she saw when she entered was Ned's new banner that was hanging proudly above the hearth. It was of a white wolf running along a black field with an equally white star streaking across the black sky. After admiring the standard, she turned her attention to the table where she saw the others were already gathered and waiting for her. Ashura was sitting beside Ned, but was looking at Lyanna with a knowing smile, as if her violet eyes could see through wood and stone to know she had just been talking to Robert. The storm is coming, Benjen said from Ned's other side. Her youngest brother had been suggesting house words for Ned and Ashura for quite a while. The newly wedded couple had yet to decide on one. "Thank you, Benjen." Ned stopped him before he could continue, but patted his brother on the shoulder to show his appreciation. He then turned to Lyanna. "Please join us, sister." She did. She took the seat across from them. She detected something different in her brother's tone. It sounded tight, and he sounded tired. "I've received a raven from father," he told them without any preamble. "What is it?" She saw the seriousness in her brother's eyes. Ashura's hand was clasped into one of his. She spared a look at Benjen, who looked as confused as she felt. "Brandon ran off and married Barbary Riswell." "What?" She couldn't believe it. She wanted to call this some poor jape on Brandon's part, but then she remembered the Tullys leaving Storm's End so quickly. This was why. The wolf's blood, that was what father called it. He said Brandon had it, and that she had it too. Though when he said it then it was with wry amusement, she was certain he was cursing it now. "This can't be true," Benjen said in dismay. "Brandon wouldn't break an oath." She pitied her younger brother seeing him so crestfallen. He idealized Brandon, and to learn that their older brother broke a betrothal to run off to marry another woman, it was difficult to accept. "It is." She remembered Lady Barbary from her visits to the Rills to see Brandon. Lyanna knew he was fond of her, but she thought little of it since her brother had a way of being fond of many women. It appeared she misjudged her brother or overlooked his impulsive nature. "That's why the Tullys left." Lyanna said aloud what she already figured out. "Yes," Ned confirmed grimly, "Brandon has paid them a serious insult. He's sullied the reputation of House Stark." Benjen looked miserable. "What does father say?" Lyanna asked. Ned didn't answer immediately. "Father writes that he will speak with Lord Tully to see if their agreement can be amended." "Amended?" Lyanna felt something cold slide down her back. "Yes, Lord Tully has a son and heir," Ned answered hesitantly. "Who's still a boy," Lyanna pointed out. "He's no older than 10. "Then it'll be a long betrothal," Benjen said. "You should like that, Lyak." She understood he was only trying to help, but Lyanna didn't take comfort in it. He was right in that it would mean she wouldn't have to actually get married for several more years. "So why aren't I happy?" "It is not certain." Lyanna Ashura gave her a small, but reassuring smile. "There is more that needs to be said." She gave a grateful nod to her good sister, who was aware of Robert's potential offer to Lyanna. She was tempted to blurt it out right now to stop any more thoughts of her being tied to the Tully boy. Then she realized it wouldn't matter. The Tullys would still take priority because of their previous agreement with her father. Ned's finger was tapping father's letter. "What is about to be said cannot leave this room," he warned them. "For the time being no one who is not a Stark can know of this." I swear they practically said it at the same time. She and him exchanged smiles at their perfect timing. "Brandon has been negotiating with Prince Roriger. The Crown Prince offered to fulfill the Pact of Ice and Fire," Ned revealed. "Brandon's future son and heir with Lady Barbary will marry a daughter of House Targaryen." "Did father know?" Lyanna knew how pleased he was with Ned's friendship with Prince Daeron, so she could see him being very welcoming of the potential of a future Targaryen bride. Would he choose a dragon over a trout? She didn't think he would, to the detriment of their family's name, so maybe he was trying to get both, but Brandon chose differently. "He's angry," but he paused, rereading the letter before looking back up at her. "I don't know," he admitted with a sigh. "It's concerning," Ashura said softly, "because there's trouble brewing in the capital between King Aerys and his oldest son, Prince Roriger." "I know," Benjen said, wanting to be taken seriously even though he was the youngest. "I've heard Maester Wallers talk about it with father." "Then you know of what is being whispered?" Ashura's violet eyes were solemn. Apparently, he didn't given his reaction, but Lyanna did. There could be a potential second dance on the horizon. She understood it now. The tension and the trepidation that was hovering over Ned and Ashura like storm clouds. If there really was to be a second dance, a terrifying thought unto itself, Brandon had picked a side. He aligned the North to Roriger Targaryen, but Ned wasn't part of the North anymore. He was a Stormlord who swore his allegiance to Robert. The Lord of Storm's End would follow Prince Daeron, which Ned would be expected to do. So if Prince Daeron didn't choose his brother, Lyanna felt something cold and heavy settle in her belly at what that would mean. My brothers could end up on opposing sides. Notes. So there we are. Some of the plots that Roriger hinted at are now beginning to see the light. To some who wonder / forgot about Elbereth, he was first mentioned way back in chapter 16 as one of Roriger's allies. So he served as the perfect go-between for Brandon and Roriger. I suppose that letter Cat got from Brandon that Elbereth delivered will probably read differently now. Edmure Tully was born somewhere between 267 AC and 274 AC according to the Asoyaf Wikia. For the sake of this story I have Edmure being born in 271 AC and Lyanna being born in 266 AC. I know the end is murky and sudden about Brandon, the North, and what's happening, but more information / details will trickle out in the coming chapters. To those who think it feels forced / unrealistic, then I'm sorry. One of the drawbacks to writing this story the way I chose was that certain theaters / spheres were being overlooked and we'd only get glimpses / hints at what might / could happen. Such as Brandon not attending Ned's wedding, the letter Cat received from Brandon, Roriger talking about the pact and it yet to be fulfilled. I suppose I went too vague to hold the mystery / reveal back when instead I should have executed those elements better, including being clearer or even blunter to make the story more succinct instead of jarring. Until next time. Spectre for Hire. P.S. I'm really sorry I wasn't able to respond to your wonderful comments for the last chapter. Sadly, I don't always have the time, but please know they mean a lot to me. I appreciate the time you take to write them. And they make my day brighter. So thank you to all those who are supporting this story. Chapter 28, Precarious. Notes. With everything going on right now, please don't forget to be smart and stay safe. To those who are still having to go out there to work during all of this, you have my utmost gratitude and admiration for what you're risking and sacrificing. There will be mentions / references / mild depictions to domestic violence in the second part of this chapter. See the end of the chapter for more notes. Chapter text. 281 AC. Ned. Is this letter for me or for him? Ned wondered after he had finished it. Who is he trying to convince? Brandon's letter was in Ned's hands, but it felt as heavy as a boulder. His brother wrote about how some houses had come to him in the last year, Riswell, Glover, Dustin, Umber, and others, more than Ned would have thought. All of them voiced their frustration at how their father was only looking south for his children's marriages. Ned had to come out here to think. Here was the stone balcony adjoined to his and Ashura's chambers. My castle, he was quick to amend that with our castle. His and Ashura's. It was this keep that allowed him to be able to take her as his wife. This castle where they started their lives as husband and wife. It did not have the history of a Winterfell or a Storm's End. It wasn't built like Casterly Rock or the Eyrie. It wasn't a palace of pleasure like Summerhall. It wasn't like any of them, and perhaps that's why he cherished it so much. It was a large circular round keep, and at its back were two tall, adjoining towers. It was built with stone and timber on the foundations of older keeps. Here on the bones of the castles that came before it did Ned and Ashura plant their future together. At the top of the towers you could see Shipbreaker Bay. It was less than a half-day's ride to reach it. The sea air would slice through the trees at high gusts, or the call of birds could be heard overhead. The sound of waves breaking and the churning of seas and storms washed over them. Robert claimed that Storm's End was directly across Shipbreaker Bay to where Ned's castle was. On a clear day perhaps you could see me wave. He had joked. Lyanna had dubbed it the Rabbit Castle. Ned was hoping that name didn't stick. She and Benjen were staying with them so that they could all travel to the tournament of Harrenhal together. They were planning on leaving the day after next. They'd ride to Storm's End to go the rest of the way with Robert's retinue. His sister had said that if you could look at it from above it would look like the shape of a rabbit's head. She then mimicked the ears with her fingers. Ned did point out that there was a bridge that connected the two towers over the round keep, which would mar this rabbit image that Lyanna was insisting on. His sister's rebuttal was swift and succinct. She rolled her eyes and stuck her tongue out at him. At the top of the right tower was the Lord's Wing, which included their room and solar. The chambers he and Ashura shared as husband and wife were small in comparison to the rooms at Winterfell. They didn't lavish their rooms with gold or gems like Lannisters. The rooms were simple and sparse. Besides the colors of their new house, black and white, Ashura used Housdane and Stark colors too when decorating the other parts of their castle. She had already put up tapestries that depicted famous stories from houses Stark and Dane. The newest tapestry that had been added was Ned's favorite because it told the tale of him and Ashura in a series of pictures which ended with them standing outside their new castle. He had put that up in their great hall. The tapestry was either so large or their hall so small because it perfectly ringed along the walls. The top of their tower had 2 balconies, one on both sides. The one connected to the Lord's room faced north towards Shipbreaker Bay. There was still a forest of trees between them, but the bay could be seen. The other balcony was attached to the Lord's solar. It looked to the south and deeper into the rainwood. Ned found him alternating between the balconies depending on his mood. Today, he was on the side that looked out at Shipbreaker Bay. The air smelled like a mixture of salt and pine. He took a breath, already feeling more relaxed. The distant sound of the sea was soothing. His new home was helping to ease the stresses that Winterfell, the home he left behind, were causing him. Here, I am in the Stormlands in my new keep, and my heart and mind drift to the north, to his family, to the Stark of Winterfell. The only thing missing is Ashura. She had gone riding with Lyanna. His lady wife wanted to become better acquainted with her new Dornish sand steed, which had been a wedding gift from Jaime and Elia Lannister. Ned had been gifted one too. He and Ashura had taken them out together yesterday. They had found a trail through the woods that took them to a secluded spot right on the water which provided them a beautiful view of Shipbreaker Bay. He looked down at the letter. His wife's wisdom and counsel were sorely needed. Ned was trying his best, but he appreciated her perspective. She had a way of seeing things that he couldn't. She saw politics where Ned just felt headaches. She saw plans where Ned just saw words. My brother wanted me well rehearsed in courtly intrigue, she had told him with an elegant shrug. He believed it would be needed since he envisioned I'd have a life in the capital. Ned remembered that all too painfully. It was a shadow that had fallen over him. A gloom that had nested in his chest in those years when her brother would not consider Ned. In the halls of her ancestors, he had flatly refused Ned's offer. He had sent his sister to the capital to marry a Targaryen prince, not the second son of Lord Stark. He wanted her to be Rhaegar's queen or Daeron's princess, not a lady of a small holdfast. The way she smiled afterwards showed Ned that she was very happy to call him husband and this small castle their home. I didn't want a dragon. I wanted a wolf. A choice I'm thankful for every day. Ned looked back at Brandon's letter to try to read it through Ashura's eyes instead of his own. It proved to be no easy thing. When he read it over, all he saw was Brandon's messy scrawl. His brother didn't use flowery language. His way of writing was like a dagger, short and sharp and to the point. The words jabbed at Ned, prickling at him as Brandon described unrest in the north. Were these parries from Brandon? He thought, defending himself by going on the attack. The Northern Lords were the part that he kept coming back to. He lost count how many times he read those few lines. He wanted to quickly deny them to call it selfish ambitions on their part, but there was truth behind them. Father was overlooking his bannerman. He had secured a Tully bride for Brandon, he approved of Ned's marriage to Ashura, and Ned knew their father wanted to match Lyanna with a southern lord. He planned for his 3 oldest children to be tied to southern families instead of northern bannermen. Did that make their concerns justified? Ned. She was already wrapping her arms around him as he was still turning to the sound of her voice. She smelled of the sea. She was stunning, he took in her frazzled appearance with a smile. Her face flushed from the ride. Her hair fell more limply around her, damp with sweat. She was dressed in simple riding clothes, but she looked as beautiful in them as if she was in one of her gowns. How was your ride? Lyanna tried to steal Vorian. Vorian was the name Ashura had given her Dornish sand steed. The horse's coloring was mostly black with some white powdered in. She thought it a fitting name since Vorian was the last Dane king, and he was known as the Sword of the Evening. Ned laughed. Did she really? His amusement earned him a gentle slap on his shoulder, but her violet eyes were glimmering. She did. She put her hands on her hips, feigning displeasure. We rode to the beach and we then went out to walk, but when the wind got a bit colder, she suggested we go back. I agreed. Ashura's tone was playful. She was clearly enjoying herself by retelling the tale. Your sister is never one for patience, Ned. She rolled her eyes, so she went off ahead, and when I climbed over the last embankment I see her trying to get on Vorian. Oh. Ned had no trouble conjuring or believing that. What did she say when she saw you? I told her that was my horse. Ashura was smiling. Lyanna got off, confessing she accidentally had mistaken mine for hers. She was giggling now. She got Vorian, my prized Dornish sand steed, the color of night, confused with her courser, whose coat is pale as snow. I could see that Ned was trying but failing to sound as if he was seriously considering Lyanna's excuse. They are both horses, 4 legs, a mane, a tail. Ashura silenced him with a kiss. On second thought Ned corrected himself after his wife's powerful form of persuasion. I'll throw her out of the castle by nightfall. His words brought out her lovely laughter. What's this? The mirthful shine in her eyes fading. She had just noticed the letter in his hand. Ned handed it to her without thought or hesitation. It's from Brandon. She accepted it with the softest of hums. Ned watched her read. He could not help it, she was mesmerizing. Her lips were slightly pursed, her brows knitted in concentration while her eyes flickered over the words. Once or twice she would look over the parchment to catch him staring. The first time she did nothing, the second time she winked at him. She'd then gone back to reading and tried not to giggle at how she could befuddle him so quickly and effortless. He sat himself down in one of the cushioned chairs that they had brought out for their use. She followed his movement, still reading, to place herself in the seat right beside him. She had barely adjusted to sitting before she looked up at him. Knew Ashura to be thorough, so he didn't mind waiting. She probably read it at least a handful of times. Looking at different words, searching for meanings or trying to find what wasn't there with each attempt. What do you think? Do you think Brandon would have reached out to Prince Rhaegar? No. Ned saw his answer didn't seem to surprise her. If anything, she looked to have been expecting it. Ashura's hands were folded in her lap. She looked to be considering her words carefully. Then there must be a reason why Rhaegar chose to write to your brother and not your father. Ned had found that strange as well. His father was the Lord of Winterfell, not Brandon. So why would the prince seek out the heir and not the lord? If Brandon agreed, it would bring the north behind Rhaegar, Ned said, but he could accomplish the same thing by writing to my father. So why didn't he? Ashura already looked to be considering several different answers. Ned looked out towards the bay while he tried to think of any reason why the Crown Prince would proceed in this manner with his family, but no answers were forthcoming, only a headache. I am not made for this scheming. What if he didn't trust your father, so he sought out Brandon instead? She said softly, as if they were in the crowded great hall back at the Red Keep and not outside on their small balcony, just the two of them. My father's Lord of Winterfell, not Brandon. She gracefully stood up, walking towards the stone railing of their balcony, her hands resting upon it. Will Brandon step aside? No. Ned knew his brother to be too proud and brash to accept a punishment that severe. He would fight against it, and Brandon wouldn't be alone. His brother had friends in the north, who'd care more about him being the next Lord of Winterfell than they ever did about Lady Catelyn being the next Lady of Winterfell. And if his agreement was with Rhaegar, then he must have the prince's support too. Would your father disown him? I do not know, Ned answered honestly. Breaking a betrothal was a breach of trust, an insult, but disinheriting Brandon, he was not sure. Disinheritance and breaking a betrothal, neither were things to take lightly. Father was not impulsive like Brandon. He was more careful. He would consider anything and everything before deciding on a course of action. What have you done, Brandon? He sighed. You've made a mess of the north. Ashura's eyes widened and he realized he must have voiced his frustrations out loud. What if the prince wanted that? She was quiet for a few heartbeats, as if trying to think it over to herself before voicing it. He must have believed that your father would raise the north against him, she murmured, with a pensive look in his direction. Against him. The air seemed to grow colder around them. Ned knew what she was referring to. There's trouble brewing in the capital between King Aerys and his oldest son, Rhaegar. Why would he think that my father would fight for Aerys? I do not think it's his father, Rhaegar feared the north would fight for. It's his brother. Rhaegar. It was a rare thing for her to feel, so she tried to enjoy it whenever it occurred. Rhaegar Targaryen was happy. She sat quietly listening to the idle chatter happening all around her. She smiled and hummed while working on her embroidery. All of them were so young, happy, and hopeful. They talked excitedly of babes and weddings that were to come and the new households they'd inherit and the new lands they'd visit. Rolla could feel the dreariness leave her bones. The discomfort and the aches fading away to the smiles and laughter. Rolla heard their wicked teases and infectious giggling, and she no longer felt like the weary and worn queen that she was. The two sitting closest to her were the only daughters she was likely to have. On her right was Princess Lila, while on the left was Lady Circea. The former had already given her a beautiful and healthy grandson and was with child again. Rolla was hoping for a girl. To have a granddaughter to hold and nurture, she thought fondly of swaddling the baby girl and watching her grow with silvery curls and shining eyes. Rolla loved her sons with all of her heart, but she had always wanted a daughter. Those the mother allowed her to birth were far too quickly and cruelly put into graves instead of the cradle. I will get a daughter soon enough. It would not be the birthing bed, but the marriage bed that would give her a second daughter. She looked to her side to see Circea was plainly bored with the needles, but was still dutifully working on her stitching. I'm not too old for more children, but her brother's touch did not leave her wanting or hoping, but grimacing and bruised. The only mercy he showed her was never staying the night. Rolla looked down at the black cloth she was working on. The Targaryen three-headed dragon's outline was nearly complete. She inspected the red stitching, pleased with her work. Fanned out around the room were more of the ladies in waiting for Princess Lila, including Ladies Went, Waynwood, Hightower, Diari, and others from the Westerlands that had accompanied Lady Circea. She did not know all of their names, but their conversing was rejuvenating. That isn't red and gold, Circea Lila pointed out with a puzzled brow. I thought you were making something with your family's colors. It isn't, Circea confirmed. She held up to show what she had been working on. The three-headed Targaryen dragon had a red body, but its necks and heads had yet to be finished. They'll be my new family's colors when I'm at Summerhall. Of course, Lila smiled sweetly at her future good sister. You must be excited for that day. I am. Circea's smile matched hers. The castle is beautiful and lovely. I'm anxious to move in. Her eyes did not hold the same warmth as her smile. To live with my husband. I know that feeling all too well, Lila said with a sympathetic nod. You've handled the transition so ably, Circea praised. No one would blame you if you struggled. A woman from Essos not understanding the intricacies of court or the various noble houses, both great and small, she pointed out. There are always lessons to be learned, so we must always stay sharp. Mistakes can lead to insults and misunderstandings. You wouldn't want that, would you, Princess? I would not. Circea Lila's exotic lilt seemed more pronounced despite the princess' usual deftness at minimizing it. I'm just glad to know my husband has so many stalwart allies he can call upon if I am in need of help. Some of the girls around the princess preened at this perceived compliment. He does, Circea agreed. Good friends can get us through bad times. Don't you agree? They can. The two were staring at one another. Their tones were honeyed, but Rolla saw the barbs that were lurking beneath. Their smiles appeared sweet, but the veneers were as clear as glass. Circea's eyes were warm, but not like the cozy embers of a hearth, but of the wild and lashing flames of wildfire. While Lila's beckoned warnings, not friendship. The bickering has spread to my daughters. Her heart was trembling beneath her chest. All this division and derision amidst her family. Is this the dragon's curse? Was too many just as dangerous as too few? Your Grace. Yes. She turned to her good daughter. I fear I must depart, she said regretfully. I must tend to my son. Lila's eyes moved towards Circea, the obligations of being a mother. She was resting one of her hands atop her stomach. You will give my love to Aegon. I will. Lila's smile was real. She then gestured for her ladies to grab their things and to follow her. I look forward to your next visit, Circea. As do I. Their smiles were sharper than swords while their eyes stared daggers at each other. Rolla waited until the last of Lila's ladies-in-waitings were gone. Lady Circea. Yes, Your Grace. I wish to spend the remainder of the afternoon with you. Her future good daughter looked surprised, but delighted. I would be honored. Good Rolla needed a reprieve. How about a stroll? Wonderful. Circea stood to join her. She didn't look the least bit disappointed in leaving either her embroidery or her own ladies-in-waiting behind. They walked out of the chambers together where Sir Alisa greeted them, "Your Grace." "We're going for a walk, Sir Alisa." "Very well, Your Grace." He dipped his head and moved to follow behind them. They began their walk with no real direction in mind. Cersei was waiting for her to speak first. Rolla looked over to see her green eyes were on her. There was a small, almost shy smile on her lips. She couldn't help but think of Cersei's parents when looking at her. It brought back memories of better days when they'd sit and laugh together into the late hours of the evening. Her parents ruled the kingdoms, while they dreamed of theirs. They'd converse about everything and anything. She hadn't loved her brother like a husband then, but looking back Rolla thought that was the only time she and him really got along. That was when the threads of respect and hope hadn't all been severed between them. Hopes for their marriage. Hopes for their children. Hopes for their reign. "Your Grace." It appeared Cersei grew tired of waiting. It made Rolla smile. The girl beside her had a restlessness that was all her own. "I was happy to hear how lovely Summerhall is coming along." It is Cersei's smile here was not forced as it had been when she had been speaking to Lila. "It will be a wonderful home for Daeron and myself." Rolla didn't miss the way she said her son's name. It was not just Summerhall that had come along well, she noted happily, but also her son's relationship with his future wife. Her own memories of the palace were filled with smoke and panic, fire, and woe. She had been given Rhaegar that day, but so much of her family had been taken from her. So much and so many lost. They were walking through an open corridor. To their right they could look down onto the training yard. She heard the clash of swords, the grunts and curses as well as their laughter and japes. They exchanged wagers and insults. "How did your father take Elia's pregnancy?" "He was very pleased," Cersei answered after giving it a little thought. "So pleased that he actually hugged her." She said it softly like it was some secret scandal. "Did he now?" Rolla was amused, aware of how reserved the hand of the king appeared to all those save a few. "What of your mother? Did they write to her?" She knew Joanna would be so happy and excited, remembering how she was when she was pregnant with the twins. She mourned the friendship Aerys had stolen from her. "I had to send her away to save her from my husband." "Mother doesn't know." Cersei's eyes seemed to sparkle with mischief. "Jaime wants to tell her in person." "Your father agreed to this?" Rolla knew those two kept nothing from each other. "He didn't," Cersei admitted. "All he said was that he might try to forget to send the Raven with the news to give them a chance to reach the rock before his letter could." Rolla laughed. The hand of the king surprised her and she found it delightful. Cersei joined her. Their arms were now intertwined. The mirth was so rejuvenating for the queen. She was pleased to discover that Cersei had inherited some of her mother's charm and her lovely laugh too. This reminded her of better days with her dear friends Joanna and Princess Maria. They were as close as sisters. The three of them had always wanted their children to marry. She was pleased to see it fulfilled. Maria's daughter had married Joanna's son and Rolla's son was set to marry Joanna's daughter. She was sad that Maria had not lived to see her daughter wed. Rolla missed her, Joanna too, but to protect her friend she had to let her go. "One day, I hope we can start anew." They were walking in the Godswood. Their merriment had taken away their sense of direction. The two of them following the stone path that moved through the grass like a grey snake. She did not venture here as often now as she had in her youth. It had become more draining on her, exhausted by the role she had to play to all those she saw and all those who saw her. How can one smile when married to a monster? How can one pretend to be happy through all the blood and tears? The smiles start to hurt as much as the scars. They passed under some elm trees whose branches provided her some needed shade. The fabric of her high collar was bothering her since it either rubbed irritably against her or would stick to her neck because of the sweat. It was too hot for this style, but she wore it because it hid the red marks that were speckled along her skin, made by teeth and nails. In reflecting about her misery with Aerys she couldn't help but think of the future happiness her son would have with the woman beside her. Let their marriage flourish instead of wither like mine. "I am thankful at seeing you and my son so happy together." Rolla noticed a little color come to the girl's cheeks, but decided not to inquire after her blush. "I only regret it took me so long to see," she confessed, her tone contrite. What's important is that you did, Ruller gently reminded her, and that you two will be together. That was when she saw something brief, but angry flicker in the girl's green eyes. Let us rest for a moment, Ruller suggested, wondering what she just saw. They found a bench which had been placed under a tall older tree that would put them entirely under the shade. Above their heads the birds were chirping happily as if to greet them. Is something troubling you? No, Your Grace, she said quickly, surprise flashing across her face before ducking her head. I just hope to marry your son after the tournament. Ruller wasn't convinced, but she didn't press further. She smiled instead. I hope so too. She found him waiting for her at the end of the corridor. Mother, he greeted her. My son, she kissed his cheek. Daeron's lilac eyes were the same color as her mother's, but they had never shown the warmth that her son's did. I can delay your visit, he must have sensed her apprehension. No, she appreciated his concern, but Aerys was a constant that she could not hide from. Let us not keep him waiting. She took his offered arm and they walked towards the end of the corridor where 2 Targaryen men-at-arms stood on guard duty, the door between them. Sir Alisa Thorne and Sir Gawain Gaunt were walking a respectful distance behind them. He stopped her when they were close to the door, but not close enough to be heard by the men. Daeron's expression was unreadable when he looked at her. Do you trust me, Mother? Of course she was surprised not just by the question, but the need of it. He looked relieved. Good, he smiled at her, I just want you to know that what I do is to help you. Daeron. His eyes remained on her for a few more breaths. All will be different, Mother. She was taken aback by how serious and sincere he sounded. I promise. You cannot promise such things, my son, she wanted to tell him. You cannot protect me like you can Cersei. When they reached the door, Daeron removed Dark Sister, giving it to Sir Gawain in keeping with her husband's rule that none save his Kingsguard were allowed to be armed in his presence. Her fingers instinctively dug into her son's arm when the door opened, but he said nothing of any discomfort. She steadied her breathing and walked with her head high. Aerys Targaryen greeted them with a scowl. He was sitting in his high back chair. Standing behind him were Sirs Barristan Selmy and Jonnet Hordayari. They both dipped their heads to them, but said nothing. Her brother's hair was a dirty, tangled mess that fell limply all around his face, and down past his shoulders. His beard was stringy and uncombed. His hands were resting on the arms of his seat. His fingernails were yellow, long, and gnarled. His outfit may have been presentable if it was clean, but the black tunic with red stitching was dirty and torn. His trousers were just as black, dirty, and wrinkled. Father Daeron spoke first. Ruller dropped into a curtsy. My king. My wife, he said mockingly, before he turned his attention towards Daeron, and my son. You may leave us. The king waved a hand. Stand outside and make sure we're not interrupted. The Kingsguard knights looked confused but obeyed. She did not blame them for their confusion. Aerys always kept them close. He watched them go with contempt as if they were daggers in his back instead of the shields they were. Come closer, my son. Ruller felt the shiver of fear go down her back at seeing how her husband was looking at him. Please, no, she was praying quietly, lips moving while her heartbeat began to grow quicker with worry. Are you the king? No, Father Daeron knelt in front of him. Too close, too close. She took a step forward instinctively, hoping her brother didn't see. And yet you gave me an order. It was only a suggestion. Father Daeron dipped his head to shy away from Aerys' outrage. I told you, but it was you who could decide, never me. Never you. Aerys repeated the words. His clawed hand reached for Daeron. His nails were pricking at his face, but her son said nothing. Do you hear me? He gripped Daeron's chin. It looked tight and painful. Never you. Yes, Father Daeron's voice wilted a little because of his father's grasp, never me. It was no easy thing what her son had to endure. It was dangerous to be in this king's presence, to be at his mercy. It was delicate and difficult to navigate. Ruller thought he was one of the few who handled it so deftly. To the ignorant, he'd look meek, but only a fool would approach Aerys differently. She called it a strength to be so undaunted in the face of such an unpredictable and dangerous force that is her husband. What is this? Regardless of her son's skill, she still wanted her husband to let go of him. My king. Aerys' head darted up at her, pinning her with a scathing look. "It's not your concern, sister." Rolla lowered her head, but it had worked. He relinquished his hold on their son. Mollified, Aerys' gaze was back on him. "Now speak of this matter you so urgently needed to discuss with me. The upcoming tournament at Harrenhal." His voice was steady. "It is not what it appears, father." "What?" Aerys' question was a sharp shrill. He narrowed his eyes looking down at their son. "What do you mean?" "Roriger's behind it, father." "No," Rolla felt as if her heart was being squeezed by hot pincers. "Do you trust me, mother?" His question from moments ago rang in her ears. She had answered so quickly and confidently, but watching this unfold, she could only wonder what he was doing. "Roriger," Aerys hissed. "He is plotting against you. He is plotting against us." "Us?" One of his hands was on Daeron's shoulder. "Yes, Father," Daeron said, "you are the king." Aerys bobbed his head. "I am the king." "You are." His long fingernails began to squeeze around Daeron's shoulder like a falcon grasping its prey. "You were right to come to me." "Thank you, father." "Roriger fights for himself." Aerys didn't let go. "Why are you fighting?" "I fight for the Iron Throne, my king." "Yes, you do," Aerys agreed, looking pleased. "Why else would you be here if not to fight for me?" "Yes, Father." Daeron's voice was hinting at the pain he must be feeling since Aerys' nails were digging deeper into his shoulder, piercing skin. She could see the red that was seeping through his shirt. Aerys looked him over for a long heartbeat in scowling silence before he let go. He then examined his nails that were painted by his son's own blood. He twiddled his fingers and blood drops rained down on the floor and he laughed. His smile was not a pleasant sight to behold. Beneath dirty, tangled hair, it was all yellow teeth, and the gleam in his eyes only made it that more frightening. "I will go to Harrenhal," he announced, "and the Seven Kingdoms will have the honor of seeing their king." He raised his hands as if presenting himself to be a prize to covet and not the punishment he really was. Rolla stilled her expression to hide her disbelief. Her brother had not left the Red Keep since Duskendale. For him to leave now for this tournament, it was hard to believe. It was even harder to accept why he was leaving. He leaves because of Roriger. She was not certain what her son was planning. He leaves because of Daeron. She could not understand his intentions by informing his father of his brother's plans. Her heart cracked like glass beneath her chest. Has Aerys' poison finally taken hold of them? Her legs wobbled beneath her, but she remained standing. "So they will," Daeron said quietly. He then looked over his shoulder to her. His determined expression couldn't be marred despite the scratches covering his face. "Father, I have a request." "A request?" He pursed his lips, looking at him warily. "I believe Mother and Viserys should leave the city." "Do you?" His voice was dangerously soft. She noticed that while Daeron was still crouching he appeared to have moved back a step or two and was now out of Aerys' reach. "Yes, to Storm's End or to Summerhall." A laugh burst from Aerys' lips. "And why would I do that?" "Because you need me." Daeron met his father's stare. "You need me against Roriger." "No." Invisible claws seemed to wrap around her throat, digging and cutting into her flesh. "No, not like this." There was no more mocking glint in his eyes. Aerys' fingers twitched on the armrest, but he did not speak. "When you gave me Dark Sister you told me to use it to protect you, my king, against your enemies from both outside our family and within." Daeron stood from his crouching position. He looked like he was mauled by some beast. His face was covered in scratches, while his tunic was torn and blooded. "That's what I'm doing, father. If you do not believe me," then he pointed to the door, "they can keep Dark Sister and you can reward it to another servant of the crown." Daeron didn't waver. "But you said a good king rewards good service." "That's what I'm asking to be my reward. That Mother and Viserys are to be kept away from Roriger's plotting." She saw what Daeron was truly asking. He wasn't protecting them from Roriger. He was trying to protect them from Aerys. Rolla felt the tears in her eyes. "It is done." She felt the cold anguish lodge itself in her chest. My boys," the cold spread through her. "I've birthed you only to watch you battle one another." Aerys had been unusually quiet. He was staring at Daeron with a look she had not seen on her brother in a long time. It did not comfort her, because it was worse than his mania. It was sly and vicious. Then he smiled. It came painfully slow to his lips because she knew what it would mean to her, to Daeron, to her sons, their family. Agreed. Notes. I'm terrible with descriptions, so I apologize if Ned and Ashura's castle sounds terrible, unrealistic, not detailed enough, or any other mistakes I may have made. I liked the idea of some in the north grumbling / pushing back about Ricard's southern ambitions. This isn't, or so liberties are being taken. If you don't agree, I respect your opinion and ask you to respect mine. To those who think it feels forced / unrealistic, then I'm sorry. One of the drawbacks to writing this story the way I chose was that certain theaters / spheres were being overlooked, and we'd only get glimpses / hints at what might / could happen. I could have executed those elements better, including being clearer or even blunter to make the story more succinct instead of jarring. So for that I apologize and will consider going back to rewrite / tweak it. I have one request / favor, if you all don't mind. I was hoping you could let me know in a review which character's perspective is your favorite. You can rank them all if you want, give me a top 3 or just the one you like the most. It would be very valuable and it would mean a lot to me. To the silent majority who don't normally review, I hope you could make an exception with this. I would greatly appreciate it if you took the time to let me know. Thank you. Until next time. Spectre for hire. P. Hesitant Smiley, I did it again. I'm really sorry I wasn't able to respond to any comments. I ran out of time trying to finish this chapter. They were wonderful to read and very encouraging. I appreciate you all taking the time to write them. They mean a lot to me. Chapter 29, Destiny. Notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Chapter text. 281 AC. Daeron. The great hall was deserted. Only a few of the braziers had been lit. The flames appeared here and there as if blooming out of the blackness. The orange glows flickered like tongues of light. Daeron walked forward. He was alone. Viserys was pleading, eyes wet with tears. I don't want to go. Come with us. Our cousins are there. He had gently pried his brother off of his leg. You will have fun. My boy. His mother had a fresh bruise along her neck. She was holding his hands, begging. Please, do not do this. Please. He had steeled himself for this. She did not know it all, and he could not say all that he wished he could, so he said only what he could. In time, mother, you will understand. He had kissed her forehead and then watched them leave through the gates of the Red Keep towards the Stormlands, towards safety. Daeron could feel the empty eyes staring down at him. The skulls loomed along his path. He looked towards his right to see the skull of Eryx watching him intently with an eyeless gaze. It had fallen during the first dance. As did the prince who rode it, Lucerys. The first dance, that's what he had just called it instead of just dance. If there's a first, then there must be a second. It was in front of him. It was waiting for him. He was not even halfway to it, but even from here it was clear to see. The seat of kings, the authority of his ancestors, forged by the conqueror from the weapons of all those who knelt to the three-headed dragon, both the humbled and the willing, the Iron Throne. It was a hideous seat, a crude construct of dragon flame. It was tall, but bent. It stood there like some wounded steel beast. There was nothing between them. You stand before destiny, little brother, Rhaegar's voice whispered inside him. I've seen the future and you are but a bump along my path. He felt the hot lash in his belly. I hate you. His fingers curled against his palms. I hate you. It was his prayer. I hate you. There will be no reconciliation. There will be no regrets. His fingers traced the flames etched in Dark Sister's pummel. He saw Rhaegar before him, blooded and beaten. The silence of the crowd when he ripped their hopes out of their hearts for their beloved prince. The smear of red on his brother's face flickering in front of him. That look in his eyes. Daeron smiled. That was a good day. He kept walking. The dragon skulls hovered overhead. The stares of ghosts followed his steps. I did not want this, mother. He wanted to tell her in the courtyard. Her lips had been trembling, her eyes pleading. It was almost enough to smother it, the fire inside, all the anger, the hatred, the resentment, but it couldn't. Daeron didn't think anything could now. A storm that cannot be snuffed. He looked down just before him and there it was, the shadow of the Iron Throne sprawled out onto the stone. He then turned to his left to see where the tiles were blackened. It was not shadows, but scorch marks that could not be cleansed away. My father burns men alive and calls it justice. My brother chases prophesies and calls it wisdom. What of me? He asked himself. Am I any different? I think to defy them and I call it loyalty. Daeron looked up at the Iron Throne that lurked ahead of him. The base reminded him of a spider's body for a reason he couldn't quite explain. It was a large, round, mound of steel with blades sticking out here and there as if trying to escape. The stairs that led up to the seat itself were steps of swords, a melted metal climb that were flanked by sharp steel that rose and curved like dragon claws. The seat almost looked to be placed in the maw of some large and ugly creature. Its steel fangs formed an earring of sharp steel that made it look like it was caught in a mid-yawn. Around the seat was a mane of metal, that fanned outwards, jagged swords and broken blades. It was an ugly thing. The only time he thought it could be any uglier was when his father was seated upon it. There is nothing greater than a dragon, my son. His father's cackle sent an icy chill through him. He made himself look past it to the tall Targaryen banner that hung behind it. The large three-headed red dragon roaring its dominance for all to see. Daeron took the black cloth out. Cersei had finished it for him. Against the dark backdrop was the three-headed dragon of his house, but it did not entirely look like the giant sigil in front of him. The dragon's body was red, but not all of its heads. The first head was red. Red for his family, for Cersei, for Jaime, for Elia, for Oberyn, for houses Targaryen, Lannister, and Martell. The second head was gold for Robert, for House Baratheon. One of his family's oldest allies. They had been fighting beside his family from the very beginning when it was Aegon and Ois. The third and last head was white for Ned, and for Gwaine and Barristan. They couldn't raise large forces, but they were loyal and reliable men, who he trusted with his life. The White Cloaks who had been with him since the beginning. The ones who had watched him and protected him. Daeron stepped forward into the Iron Throne's shadow. It consumed him in a blink. He could feel its black reflection fall over him. Usurper. A cold voice whispered inside him, or savior. He looked at his new personal sigil and saw his family, his friends, their smiles, he heard their laughter. It played before him all the memories, seeing their faces, hearing their voices, and he felt his own smile, but it didn't linger. Daeron put the cloth away and sighed. My brother cannot give me peace. Our father cannot give us justice. What am I to do, but give war? The approaching footfalls did not surprise him. They were expected. He took one last look at the metal monstrosity before stepping out of its looming shadow. That was when he saw her. Her movement was graceful. She looked enchanting. Cersei was lovely in red, but it was Lannister red. He wanted her in Targaryen red or in nothing. Daeron's thoughts flickered back to that night at Storm's End when she was standing before him with the only thing on her was his eyes. She was proud and beautiful and his. He had strongly considered marrying Cersei, especially after their tryst before the tournament, to thwart whatever it was his brother was planning, but he decided against it. The wedding would get out and Rhaegar would use it to turn father against him. That was something he could not risk. Soon, he reminded himself. Daeron. Yes. Her fingers began to trace one of the scratches on his face. There was a soft hue in her eyes, her mouth pursed. They will fade, the wounds were expected. His father was unpredictable even at his most malleable. They shouldn't exist, her whisper was harsh. He took her hand from his cheek and kissed her fingertips. Perhaps, they'll think I angered my lioness. Daeron looked down to see the want burning behind her gaze, the slight flush of her cheeks. I left my scratches where they could not see. Her voice was a seductive lilt. He felt a warm shiver-like feeling go through him. The knowledge that Sir Gwaine and Cersei's Lannister guards were about to walk in any minute was the only thing restraining him. He saw the dip and disappointment in her expression, and he was sure it was seen just as clearly on his. He could have done worse. She didn't hide her anger for his father. What of your shoulder? It saw he hoped by the time they reached Harrenhal there would be no further discomfort. We needed him. Daeron reminded her, whoever controls the king controls the kingdoms, he said softly, for now it would not be wise to anger him. She let out a very unladylike snort at that precaution. He understood her reaction. His father was a volatile man, what could make him happy one morning could make him furious by evenfall. It was a tiresome dance, but it was one that he needed to do for just a little while longer. He needed his father at Harrenhal to serve as his shield against Roriger's plots. Do you think he will stop your brother? Yes, Daeron was certain the presence of their father would throw off whatever it was Roriger had in mind for him. His brother would be forced to move carefully now that he threw their father's suspicion on him. However, if Daeron thought Aerys was under his brother's sway, then he'd have to react accordingly. Let us pray that my father's suspicions run deeper towards Roriger than they do me. And afterwards we will marry. Her eyes seemed to glow in the dim light at his promise and her smile shone brightly. And then Daeron detected the uncertainty in her tone. He understood it. Their future was so difficult to see. He didn't answer her, instead he turned back to the Iron Throne. Did you know Harrenhal was one of the first sites of battle during the dance? No, she was standing beside him. He felt her gaze first on him before it flickered towards the end of the great hall where it was resting. What happened? The Rogue Prince took it without bloodshed, Daeron's fingers going to the hilt of Dark Sister. The same sword that Prince Daemon had wielded. The Iron Throne remained impassive at their attention. Daeron looked upwards to the empty seat. He felt it in his chest. The stirring as if a dragon was woken from its slumber. For the first time he could see it, he allowed himself to. He wasn't in the shadows. He wasn't pushed to the side and out of sight. No, he was right there in the middle of it, the only calmness in a frenzied storm of celebrations. They were all there for him. He saw their smiles and heard their cheers. There was no father. There was no Roriger. It was all for me. The swell rose in his throat and his fingers trembled. It was me they wanted. He felt her hand in his. Her eyes on him. Together. My brother believes that destinies are set. He claims they are etched in stone, dried ink on the page, but I don't, Daeron said quietly. I believe we make our own destinies. That we must seize it. We must fight for it. He gave the Iron Throne one long and final look before turning away. Soon, we shall see who is right, him or me. Arthur. What do you think? It took the Sword of the Morning a few beats of silence to realize that the Crown Prince was directing the question to him. Roriger had just adjourned his discreet meeting with his father's Master of Whisperers. I think it is strangely unsettling how well Varys wears a dress, Arthur observed dryly. Lila let out a giggle before covering her mouth and Roriger's lips curved upwards. It had been such a strange sight to see. Varys had come to them wearing a dark rough spun dress that Arthur saw many of the castle servants wear. He had a wig that was nestled perfectly atop his head. It was long brown hair that was braided and fell past his shoulders. He looked like a plump older woman. It was discomforting how easily Varys was able to conceal his true self behind this costume. If Arthur had crossed him in the corridor he would have dismissed him as one of the servants attending the rooms, and thinking nothing more of it. It made Arthur think, had he passed Varys before throughout the Red Keep never knowing it? How many other disguises does he have? I should ask him who braided that wig, Lila jested, sloppy and very telling. I'm sure he'd welcome your suggestions, my princess. Arthur smiled when the image came to him of Lila rebraiding an impatient Varys. The princess returned his smile, seemingly just as amused as he was. She was relaxing off to the side on a cushioned chaise, having already put baby Aegon to bed. Prince Roriger had been sitting behind his desk when the eunuch gave his report. It was so much, Arthur thought, all that information, secrets, details, it made his head spin trying to follow it all. His friend and wife hadn't looked to be struggling, listening aptly to everything that was said, as well as thinking and planning on how best to use everything Varys had told them to their advantage. You did not answer the question, my friend, Roriger pointed out politely. A moment, my prince, Arthur asked, since there was so much that had been discussed. It was truly unnerving how much the Master of Whispers knew from what he and his spies had listened and seen. His friend acquiesced. It had been revealed that Prince Oberyn had slipped back into King's Landing after a very short exile in Essos. A stint so brief that Roriger believed House Euronwood should be made aware of the Red Viper's sudden return. There was news from Elbereth about the tension at Winterfell. Lords Mutin, Darry, Went, Connington had agreed to Roriger's request. What it was had not been divulged, and it had appeared only Arthur was ignorant of it given how the Crown Prince and Princess took it. In truth, however, he hesitated because despite everything he had learned or heard from the evening, he knew as soon as his friend asked what it was he wanted to address his brother, Prince Daeron. That was not something he was eager to discuss. Arthur had spoken of patience and appeasement between the brothers, but his friend would not hear it. Roriger saw Daeron as a threat, but Arthur couldn't, and then Varys had brought forth his news. It would appear, my prince, that your brother has spoken to your father. Prince Daeron has told King Aerys you plan on using the tournament at Harrenhal to steal his throne. He had been stunned when it had been delivered to them. Princess Lila had been furious, spitting out heated words including referring to her good brother as a liar and schemer. Roriger had taken it with little reaction besides a soft sigh and a nod to acknowledge he had heard. Arthur's surprise had shifted towards sadness upon seeing how badly Prince Daeron had stumbled. He never wanted to be your enemy, Roriger. He just wanted to be your brother. That was what he should have said, but he didn't. He had sworn his vows to Roriger to be his man, not Daeron's. Prince Daeron and the Lannisters were after Roriger's birthright. Arthur remembered back to that day in the Great Hall, and he saw and understood the prince's plan perfectly. With one order, my boy, I could name you my heir. You would follow me as the next king of the Seven Kingdoms. King Aerys' words had taken root in his second son's heart. It would seem Prince Daeron would make lies the base of his foundation. It was a sad realization to see how badly Lannister greed had corrupted him. It turned the prince into someone that he couldn't recognize. Arthur had never seen or heard such ambitions planned or discussed by Roriger, especially not for the tournament, but it had not deterred Prince Daeron to spread these falsehoods. It was true that Arthur had suggested this course for the Crown Prince, something that still pained him, but Roriger had said no, fearing Daeron would usurp him. I thought Roriger was wrong, but it would seem I was the one who was wrong. His friend had claimed he had evidence from his brother's plots, and here it was. I was wrong, Arthur admitted. He then dipped his head to his friend. I am sorry. You truly are a remarkable knight, my friend, Roriger replied. You apologize for the actions taken by others. He had gotten out of his seat during Arthur's thinking to stand near his wife, who welcomed his attention eagerly. What about the king? Arthur asked, since Aerys was now fooled. His suspicion was directed towards the wrong brother. It should be on Daeron, not Roriger. My father will see the truth, was all Roriger said, and didn't look inclined to say anything further. And of the Queen and Prince Viserys? They shall keep in the Stormlands for now, Roriger answered. Let my brother think they are beyond his schemes, but they will be summoned back when my dispute with Daeron is settled and the Lannisters are declared. Roriger's hand went to the swell of his wife's belly, and then I will see the prophecy fulfilled. You're already carrying the second head, a girl, he said it with absolute certainty. A girl. She looked surprised, but happy. That's wonderful. She put her hand atop the one of his that was resting on her stomach. We could name her after your moth. No, he interrupted firmly, she is Rhaenys, and after her you will deliver Visenya. That is the way he told her. Then you may rest, my wife. It is not a burden, husband, she assured him. I know, he smiled down at her. She basked in it as if it was as warm and bright as sunshine itself. What if the prince or the Lannisters refuse? Arthur found himself asking. Before he'd never think to ask, but that was when he believed Prince Daeron loyal instead of seditious. Why would he suddenly submit to a trial and its ruling? Arthur feared he would not, and neither would the Lannisters, and he knew what that would mean: war. Roriger turned his attention away from his wife, whose disappointment was immediate by the dip of her mouth. My brother's treason will be addressed in one way or another. I am not without friends to call upon. My wife too is blessed. Hers have been kind enough to offer their assistance if such a problem was to arise. Roriger put his hand on Arthur's shoulder, guiding him to a nearby table. There he saw an assortment of items of great worth, including jewel-encrusted cups, golden necklaces, and other valuable gifts that had been given to Roriger and Lila from her friends and family throughout the Free Cities. Beside some diadem from one of the free cities he saw a long and large golden cloth folded carefully. When he was close enough he realized the golden fabric wasn't the valuable gift, it was what lay beneath it. An outline that couldn't be completely concealed. His fingers pulled back on it. His breath caught in his throat upon seeing and recognizing what it was in front of him. Black Pharaoh. Chapter 30, Edge. Notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Chapter text. 281 AC. Joanna. It is a sound plan, my lady. I'm aware she regarded Maester Desmond who stood before her. Grey was beginning to seep into his black hair. He had recently trimmed his beard. It made his face look thinner. After all, I was the one who came up with it, she pointed out wryly. Desmond smiled. You were, my lady. He kept his hands in front of him. They were clasped and still. However, I understand your precaution, he said. I respect it. She tilted her head to acknowledge she had heard him. Do we know when we should expect them? A fortnight, the Maester guessed, mayhaps, a little more. His chains rattled as he moved. It depends on the bird and the waves. It does. She went over to her desk. Joanna had made a copy of the letter she had sent to Lord Quavian Greyjoy. She would let her husband read its contents when he returned. Tywine had already given his blessing to pursue the Iron Islands as a potential ally. She suspected he was hesitant, but his trust in her outweighed any uncertainty he may have with the Ironborn. Joanna knew little of Quavian Greyjoy, but knew enough to know that he was different than some of his predecessors. In the past, Ironborn ambition was carried out at the point of a sword and on their longships, but not him. Lord Quavian brought Maesters to the islands and was trying to encourage more trading and marriages with the other kingdoms to strengthen his people instead of reaving. Tywine, when he gave her his blessing, had written what he knew of him. They had spent some time together during the War of the Ninepenny Kings. Her husband respected the man. However, he could not forget that it was Quavian's Ironman who sacked Faircastle during his father's reign. So his words had been both complimentary and cautionary of the Lord Reaper of Pike. There have been some successful alliances between the Westerlands and the Ironborn, my lady. His fingers were curling around some of his chains to stop them from tinkling while he moved. King Harmund Hoare took a Lannister as his wife and queen. He did. She had no more daughters to give, and Quavian was already married, as were some of his sons. Our past alliances with the Iron Islands is but a few drops of ink in a sea of blood. Different times, my lady, Desmond said respectfully. Those were different men, he said, and ladies. These may be different times, but it will lead to the same thing. She did not want to say the words aloud, but the last few letters she received from her husband all but confirmed what was coming on the horizon. The Crown Prince is trying to sever our betrothal with Prince Daeron. He is trying to steal Summerhall from us. The anger roiled in her stomach. She had thought Aerys was the only fool of his brood, but it would seem he had been generous enough to pass some of it on to his eldest son. Upon that first disconcerting letter Tywine had sent her, she had written back immediately, telling him of her thoughts and plans, as well as ensuring she would wait for his blessing before she'd continue. He did, so she went to work. It was clear now that Cersei would have been wasted on Rhaegar, the fool that he was, just as Joanna herself would have been wasted on Aerys. She was pleased to see her daughter had found a betrothed who respected her. Joanna had little doubts about the union prospering between Cersei and Prince Daeron. And the few she did have melted away once she found out he had gifted her a sparring sword and his blessing to use it. That will be all, Maester, she smiled, grateful for his attending her. He took his dismissal with a bow, leaving the Lady of the Rock to her thoughts on what to prepare and expect for what was to come. We will be ready. She would not allow Casterly Rock, the Westerlands, or her family itself be caught unprepared. It was why she was reaching out to the Iron Islands. She was waiting to hear back from Prince Doran too. The Crown Prince appeared to be trying to make his moves, and she was prepared to make hers. Did he truly think we'd accept this insult like some tamed house cat? That we'd allow him to take what was ours? She remembered he was fond of the ruins of Summerhall. Perhaps he should visit the ruins of Tarbeck and Castamaria to see what happens to those who think them better, to those who thought to attack the Lannister lion. What do we have here? Joanna was not surprised to find her youngest in the castle's library. The library of Casterly Rock was in an old and large cavern. It was no longer a place to mine gold and other valuable minerals. Its dirt walls were replaced long ago by bookshelves. This was a place to mine information and knowledge, to dig into books instead of soil. It was near 3 stories in height with various galleries above them which included more bookshelves as well as tables and desks. It was held and supported by a series of tall pillars. Some of the older ones had runes etched into them. A spiraling steel stairwell was planted near the center of the cavern, spinning upwards to connect the various floors. In the metalwork were lions ascending upwards. Her Tyrion was reading at a table all to himself. He had picked a secluded spot with his only company, a small lantern and a pile of books. One of them looked worn and faded, but she could still manage to read the inscription on its cover. It was one of the volumes of their family's history. He gave her a sheepish smile when he looked up to greet her. "I'm sorry." She soothed his obvious worry when she pressed a kiss to his forehead. "That you're late to your lessons?" He nodded, but was looking down to hide his guilty look. "You got distracted." It wasn't a guess or a question. What was it this time? She took one of the chairs to move it closer to him. When she sat down she saw some dust had coated itself on his tunic. She brushed it away. He pointed to what he was reading. "I'm trying to find them the perfect name." He was so desperate and determined to help them any way he could. Joanna smiled at her boy's thoughtfulness. He was so anxious to meet his baby nephew or niece. Maester Desmond told her that Tyrion had asked several questions on the subject of childbirth and pregnancy, including if there was a to tell if the baby was to be a boy or girl. "What have you found so far?" "We have a lot of drolls." His mismatched eyes looked up at her, "and Lancels." "Yes, we do." She moved her seat closer so she could better read the page he was on. "Drold the Great," she read, then skimmed what followed, which included his raid on the Iron Islands and how he returned to the Rock with more than 100 hostages. "Do you like any of them?" His face scrunched up a little before shaking his head. "I don't think Jaime would name a son, Drold. He would say it's an old man's name." "I think you're right." She was just as certain Jaime would be making the same face Tyrion was if that name was suggested to him and Elia. "I think that's enough for now," she said gently before closing the book over her son's soft groan. "It's not as if you won't be back here." Joanna turned to see if he would argue her point. He gave her another one of those cute, but shy smiles before dipping his head to hide how right she was. It made her laugh. She leaned over to kiss his hair, which always made him happy. "You must also not allow distractions to keep you from your duties, Tyrion." I know his guilt appeared genuine, so she didn't continue. "There are more to names than just books of the past." Joanna knew that Elia and Jaime were considering several choices, some of which were not even Lannister names. I know. He was quick to agree, but slower to get out of his seat. His short legs made it difficult with the chair so high. "Let me help." She took his hand. He took it after only a brief pause. His feet touched the ground. "I could have done it." "I know." She combed her fingers through his hair. "However, I'm glad you let me help you." "Why?" He frowned in confusion. "Because, my son," she answered, "I love being there for you." She thought fondly of all the times she was there for Jaime and Cersei before him. The way their faces would brighten and their eyes shine with gratitude. She wasn't quite ready to lose that special bond with Tyrion. "Oh," he sounded surprised. "Well, if it makes you happy then I don't mind." Her heart swelled. "There will come a time when it's no longer my role." "When?" "Someday soon, but you will be ready," she answered. "Do not doubt that." He looked like he wanted to, but it passed. "Mother." "Yes." They were walking out of the library. "Why did you name me Tyrion?" he asked. "I read about one in the book. There was a Tyrion. They called him the Tormentor." He mumbled. He sounded scary. He sniffled. I was afraid since I am." She never let him finish. "You were not named after him. Do you understand?" He didn't answer. "Tyrion." He flinched, as if the name hurt him. His eyes were glistening. They stopped in the middle of the corridor before she tugged gently at his hand, leading them to the first room she could find. It was an empty guest chamber. The red curtain of the four-poster bed was drawn and the golden lions stitched onto them watched the intruders with silent suspicion. You were named after someone important. Her heart ached at seeing him in such a way. For him to think they had named him after that particular Lannister because of his differences. His name was so important to her, she carried it close to her heart. The legacy she wanted to live on after what had happened. Really? He hiccuped. Would I lie to you? No, his little shoulders sagged in relief. He used his sleeve to wipe at his eyes. You were named after someone I loved. He perked up. Who? My brother. She could see his face hovering in front of him. His messy blonde hair falling over his hazel eyes. It was painful to think about, a scar on her soul that was slow in healing. I had an uncle Tyrion. He looked and sounded surprised. You did. She felt the sharp tug in her chest. He would have loved you, my boy. She knew it with all her heart. It was in her brother's nature to love and laugh. Tyrion the trickster, that was what he called himself, before claiming himself clever for thinking of it. What happened to him? He died. She wouldn't say anymore. Oh, he sounded so small and awkward. I'm sorry. Thank you. She forced herself to smile when their eyes met. I know he would have been honored to have you bear his name. His eyes widened in disbelief. Really? Yes. She left no room for doubt. You will be a great Lannister just like your siblings and just like your father. Tyrion's chest puffed. His face determined while he straightened his posture. There was never a more serious-looking 8-year-old boy. Joanna Lannister was happy to see the words had taken root within him. The seeds had been planted and she could not wait to see what would bloom. I send a raven and he sends a prince. Joanna smiled at the unexpected guest who had come to Casterly Rock. Does that mean I must stay with the ravens? Prince Luwin Martell flashed her a smile. Joanna laughed, pleased to see neither Age or his sister's passing had dampened his spirits. We may have chambers available for a prince and a most welcomed guest. That was when she hugged him. It has been too long, Luwin. It has, he agreed with a hint of solemnness. The Dornish prince stood proud and tall in front of her. He was wearing a bright orange tunic with red suns woven throughout it with dark trousers and boots. His hair was still mostly black just like she remembered. It rested just above his shoulders while an equally dark beard covered his cheeks and chin. His eyes were just like his sister's and his niece, warm and friendly. Is Prince Doran and his family well? He is, Luwin answered, as if his wife and children. Good. Joanna gestured for him to follow her to a pair of cushioned chairs on the far side of the solar. Will you be staying for a while? It is a pity that you missed your niece. I dare not impose to overstay my welcome in the lion's den. He pointed to the golden lions roaring down at them on crimson cloths and then the ones carved into wooden frames and in the metal work. It will be no bother. Then I will. He bowed his head to show his gratitude before he sat down across from her. The servants at Casterly Rock were punctual and reliable. She would not have it any other way. They appeared with an assortment of fruit, cheeses, jams, and bread, as well as presenting them with different vintages to choose from, including Dornish red, which they both chose. They then slipped away just as quickly and quietly. Dornish. He picked up one of the blood oranges. Yes, she was pleased at how well the trade between the Westerlands and Dorne was going. He nodded his approval before he ate one of the slices. Joanna helped herself to some of the bread and jams, settling on a plum one that she had grown fond of. I am surprised to see you not attending the tournament. She wiped at some jam she felt on the corner of her mouth. He shrugged. My nephew needed me. He didn't look too put out. Family and Dorne come before personal glories. His eyes were twinkling from above the rim of his glass. Besides, it was a mercy. A chance to let some of the younger knights earn some acclaim. Joanna smiled. You were always so generous, Luwin. You wouldn't know it if you talked to Maria, he teased, but there was a small sense of sadness behind his eyes at the mention of his sister. The princess passing had been a difficult storm to weather. Even after these years the grief would come to her sharp and sudden. I would not say she talked of you, Joanna began, I would instead say that she complained often about you. Luwin chuckled. He took another sip of his wine. I must say, Joanna said, having Elia here at the Rock has been a blessing that I cannot even begin to describe. She is Maria's daughter with her composure, and her confidence. Sometimes I feel as if I am watching a young Maria before me. However, it's Elia's gentle touch I cherish most of all, especially in regards to her treatment of Tyrion. Joanna looked down into her glass. She felt a rush of warmth fill her chest. I could not have asked or prayed for a better good sister for my boy. Or a better wife for my Jaime. She will make a great mother, Luwin observed softly. She will. Joanna did not think there was an easier thing to agree on. She had been so delighted and excited when she heard of Elia's pregnancy. It couldn't even be dimmed when she heard Jaime's attempts to try to keep it a brief secret from her. He should have known Tywin would not heed that foolish instruction. It still had made her chuckle since she knew Jaime had done it because of his desire to see her reaction for himself.